13th, 2020. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right, the next item is any changes to the order of the agenda tonight? Anyone like to make a change to the order of the agenda? Laura.
Hi, Mayor Collins, thank you very much. I propose that we move item 7 to after item 10. It's my hope that some of the discussion that we have in the item number 8 and 10 will inform our thinking with respect to some of the requested agenda items in item 7.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Any objections to that? Not hearing any. Okay. So we will move that to after item 10, after new business. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Next is public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council may do so at this time. This is for any matters not on the posted agenda. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. If an item you're speaking on is not listed on the agenda, please be advised that the City Council may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed under the Brown Act. You should be seeing a phone number on the screen to dial 669-900-9128. If you get a busy tone, there is a second number, 253-215-8782. And when prompted, enter the meeting ID 452-388-965. Once you connect, you will be placed on mute in a waiting room. When it is your turn to speak, the last 4 digits of your phone number will be announced and you will be unmuted. Crystal, do we have anybody or do we need to wait a minute or so?
Yeah, Mayor Collins, we do have one caller, so I'll go ahead and admit them into the room.
All right.
Good evening, caller, ending in 632. Thank you for calling into the San Carlos City Council meeting. You will have approximately 2 minutes to address the council, and if you'd like, please state your name prior to proceeding with your public comment. Thank you. Caller 632, can you hear us?
Yes, this is Sonia.
Hello, Sonia.
Hello, Sonia.
Hi. Sorry, I'm trying to not have double. Am I supposed to talk right now?
Yes.
Yes. You may begin.
Okay, so I wanted to just appreciate how much you guys are doing for the pandemic situation, and also just give my support for following the precedent that Oakland recently set by opening streets to, enough streets to encourage more exercise and safe distance, biking, walking, rolling, fresh air, getting outside, by closing them to cars except for residents who live there, deliveries, and emergency vehicles. I have a number of streets in mind that might work for, that wouldn't inconvenience people too much, and I think it might also help us use this time, the circumstances that are here, to move towards reaching our city's climate goals. There's a lot of families wanting to bike right now with small children. It's the perfect time to be out on the streets, but it's still a little worrying. It would be fantastic to use a few less used streets in San Carlos that aren't needed right now for through traffic to open them up. I'm thinking Eaton would be one, Howard would be one, Arroyo would be one, and then I'd love to see Old County Road be a northbound, 1-lane northbound for now, and also Cedar a northbound one-way, and Elm be a southbound one-way street, maybe with street parking just on one side. My plan is to put that in a proposal and send it to you guys by email, and also broach it on Nextdoor with the neighborhoods involved and see what people think. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Crystal, do we have anybody else who has signed up to speak?
It doesn't appear so. Nope.
All right. Okay, at this point, we're going to move on to council communications and announcements. These are brief items from members of the City Council regarding upcoming events in the community and correspondence that they have received. They're informational in nature, and no action will be taken on these items at this meeting. Let's see, anybody who wants to speak? Crystal, I don't have oh, there I have something. Okay, I just needed to bring up my participant list. Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had two comments that I wanted to make on two different topics. I was surprised by staff's recent decision to restart the San Carlos Avenue Safety Improvement Program. The COVID-19 emergency orders prohibit all construction activity other than that deemed essential to public health and safety. Staff told me there were 3 risks a restart would mitigate. 2 of those 3 risks, however, are purely financial in nature and have nothing to do with public health and safety. I don't want to spend public funds unnecessarily any more than anybody else does, but financial risks don't fit the exemption. The remaining risk is related to public safety, but in a fairly distant way. Moreover, the project, I believe, could have been pursued in a more limited way that would have substantially reduced even that risk. Does this matter? In one sense, no, because the one valid risk fits, however precariously, within the public safety exemption. But people who live in glass houses must be careful about throwing stones. It's good that staff wants to avoid risking taxpayer funds, but that risk is no different from a developer or homeowner wanting to avoid risking his or her fund on their project, which was shut down. If we're all in this together, we should all be equally compliant with the regulations. On a different subject, I wanted to talk briefly make a comment about unnecessary business activity. Because there isn't yet a vaccine for COVID-19, we have only one tool today for combating it, and that's breaking the cycle of infection. That protects individuals and conserves limited medical resources. It's also the main reason why business activity was curtailed. Under the regulations, only certain business activities are allowed. That's business activity, mind you, not business per se. Businesses allowed to operate must only offer services deemed necessary. Just because one part of a business is necessary doesn't mean it is. So it's my hope that most of the businesses that I'm familiar with in town are in fact following this guidance. I hope that the few that are not will reflect on what they're doing and realize that by limiting the amount of customer contact they have to the truly necessary activities permitted by the county, that they're going to help themselves and all of us in combating this virus outbreak. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Laura.
Thank you, Mayor Collins. I just wanted to report out on some activities at the countywide level with respect to what will happen when we emerge from shelter in place. The county has designated a team to put together a long-term plan that will focus on 30, 60, and 90 days and longer. The concept was introduced to us in terms of the framework that needs to be considered by Craig Fugate, who's a Chief Emergency Management Officer with long-standing experience in these types of matters. He reminded us that people are the vector for disease transmission, and that until a vaccine is offered, social distancing will continue to be the tool to keep our community safe. In addition, the ability to test the entire population through the use of identifying antibodies and the population is disease-free will continue to be a rate-limiting factor. We will also need to continue to monitor outbreaks to manage future waves and outbreaks. The work streams that they've identified are around planning for underserved populations and equity, education sector, delivering resources to a shelter-in-place population, economic recovery, and financial impact, which some experts say can be more devastating than the actual disease itself. Planning and preparing for a secondary natural disaster while sheltering in place, triggers for coming out of shelter in place, which would include modeling, testing, and tracing, and preparing for a second wave. Ultimately, he said it's important that we consider what conditions that we want to achieve. Thank you, Ron.
All right. Thank you, Laura. Sarah?
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to just quickly touch on two things. I wanted to let the public know that there's quite a bit of really interesting data on the smchealth.org website. It now breaks down the number of tests administered, those that are positive, those that are negative, those who have been diagnosed with COVID-19, and it's broken down by age group. The data gets better and better every day, so I would just encourage the public to check it out. I'm also on the library JPA governing board, and I wanted to let everyone know that now there are live experiences that are being offered online, and the public can go to SMCL blogs, where schedules for virtual staff-led programs are listed, including story times, craft classes, art classes, lots of great options for all ages. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Adam?
Thank you, Mayor. Lower my hand. I just want to update on the public and my colleagues on two meetings that I had, Zoom meetings. One was the South Bay Waste Management Association, so that they have suspended bulk collection right now, given that they don't want the drivers and their workers to be exposed, and try to protect that as much as possible. But I am working with Jeff and with Stephen Machida on a potential option for San Carlos residents. They're talking to them in town and have them picked up by Recology in a single spot, and potentially some cardboard and recycling as well. So hopefully in the next week or so, we'll have some announcement about that. And then secondly, just a quick note that we had the CCAG meeting, and Marie Chuang from Hillsborough was elected the new chair, and Davina Hurt from Belmont was elected the new vice chair. And we voted on a street scanning program that would allow some traffic flows and stuff to be determined, but it was put in with a 6-month delay in the contract, knowing that traffic flow right now is not what it is and won't be for a while. So hopefully that'll be helpful in terms of looking at how we're managing traffic flow in the future.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I just had a couple things. You may have noticed that Caltrain operations have been reduced. They've actually been reduced to about 42 trains a day. It's about a 90% reduction in the number of trains being run every day. However, the upside to that is that because of all the electrification work that's being done, it has allowed the contractors to do more work, to expand their work hours. So more work is being done on the electrification project. So both good and bad there. Okay, did anyone else have any other comments that they wanted to make? Sarah, I still saw your hand up, so I wanted to ask. Okay, all right, well, let's move on. The next item is a consent calendar. Are there any items that anybody would like to remove, or is there a motion to pass them all?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Crystal?
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Parmer Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor Collins?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
consent calendar passes.
We are now skipping item 7. We're going to move on to item 8, reports to council. These are updates on key city projects and city department heads and staff and city council subcommittees. They're informational in nature, and no action will be taken on these items at this time. 8A is a report on an update on the coronavirus pandemic. Is that you, Jeff?
Yes, it is, Mr. Mayor. And I'll just wait for the PowerPoint to come up here.
Okay.
Crystal, are you bringing the PowerPoint up? Great, thank you. So I'll be giving this report myself, and I'll just be kind of speeding through it. We gave a long report at our last city council meeting, and we've been putting out quite a bit of information in daily updates to the public via the city's website and our e-notify tools, social media, and whatnot. And as you might imagine, there's quite a bit of information. I just need to figure out how to move this. Nope. Shrink it. There we go. So I thought we'd start with the San Mateo County actions. The County San Mateo Board of Supervisors approved $3 million for the San Mateo County Strong Fund to help individuals and nonprofits and small businesses. There's currently $4.2 million in the fund, and they are actively soliciting donations from private and public partners throughout the county. The county updated its health order, extending the shelter-in-place order to May 3rd, redefining essential activities, and ceasing most construction activities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The county event center's been set up with 250 beds as a field hospital and will be used as needed. The county issued an emergency order on residential evictions for non-payment of rent and lease payments due to COVID-19, so there will be no evictions while that order is in effect. The county enacted a commercial eviction order for businesses with gross receipts below 2.5 million for the unincorporated areas. I believe the cities of San Mateo and South San Francisco have also adopted a similar ordinance. The county postponed the deadline for the second installment of property tax payments to May 4th, but cities were notified that that would not have an impact on us receiving the funds, so it's just a slight delay there. In terms of state actions, the governor issued a statewide shelter-in-place order. The state's been working with FEMA and other partners to get the resources that it needs and deployed out into its counties. I know our counties work very closely with the state to make sure that our needs are being met here in San Mateo County. The state's also taken over the Fairfield Inn from the federal government. They're not currently sheltering folks there, but they're holding on to it as a potential alternate care site if it's needed. We're also expecting a significant announcement from the governor tomorrow about next steps in terms of statewide orders and how this will unfold in coming weeks. Okay, can't really seem to. No. I don't know if it's just moving really slow. Okay. The State Judicial Council established restrictions on eviction cases. This is effectively stopping evictions, both residential and commercial. They did this for public health and safety reasons for the courts until 90 days after the governor declares the COVID-19 emergency over. The state's providing a number of emotional support services on its website listed here in the slide to help folks who are experiencing anxiety or other issues as a result of the shelter-in-place order. In terms of federal actions, The federal government has postponed the due date for filing income taxes to July. They've opened its stockpile of medical and protective equipment and supplies to areas needing them, requested supplies from other countries and U.S. industry, which are being received sporadically and then deployed out to the hardest hit areas that are in need of these supplies. They passed the CARES Act to provide funding to various segments of the economy and will consider additional funding as the needs grow. In terms of the community of San Carlos, we've had 173 folks offer to volunteer in one capacity or of another. Through our helpline, we've received 35 requests for help, most of those related to getting groceries or medication for folks that are homebound or have other issues that are preventing them, high-risk groups and whatnot. We've had requests for help with paying bills and rent, and help using technology to accomplish these tasks. So we've been working very closely with these folks to get them in touch with nonprofits. We've been working with the Community Foundation to address these types of needs. City council members earlier this month volunteered for the call center for about a week after we'd mailed out postcards to the entire city to let them know what the phone number was and that we needed them to contact us if they had special needs. That number is still active. It's not being staffed. It's being operated as a message box. So if anybody calls, it's being checked several times a day. So if there's folks still with needs, please call that number and we will get back to you and get you in touch with folks who can help make sure that your needs are being met and get you in touch with groups for whatever issue you might be having to help you. Due the order to shelter in place, there's not much activity allowed, and we continue to respond to questions. There's still a number of questions that we're getting from the public and from businesses about what's considered essential and what's allowed. And a lot of our time and attention has been focused on getting those questions answered and making contact with the public when there are issues taking place that ought not be. We've been working closely with the Community Foundation. They're helping the city with the Neighbor to Neighbor program to make sure that everybody who needs groceries or needs medication picked up or has other issues that they're not able to take care of themselves has the opportunity to get help from the large group of volunteers who have offered. The foundation received over $250,000 in donations. They've donated $50,000 to the Samaritan House, $50,000 to the Second Harvest Food Bank, $33,000 in personal protective equipment and aid to the County of San Mateo Medical Center of $10,000, Kaiser Redwood City $10,000, Sequoia Hospital $8,000, and PAMP $5,000. And we're working with the foundation now to put out information to the public probably sometime next week, letting them know all the various nonprofits that are doing work that have potential volunteer opportunities for the community, as well as opportunities for philanthropic giving, as the demands on their programs have gone up sharply. And the foundation is also going to be seeking to raise funds so they can increase their giving and support of the various nonprofits that are helping to serve residents and businesses in our community. The City Emergency Operations Center opened its EOC back in March. It remains open since March 25th on a virtual basis to protect staff by allowing remote operation. We're ensuring we're meeting all the reporting and documentation requirements of the state and the federal government so that we can potentially recoup some of our costs for the community of managing this disaster in San Carlos. and our associated efforts. So that's ongoing. We have daily briefings, not only at our staff, but with the county EOC and state and federal representatives as well on an as-needed basis. During the week of March 23rd, we were able to remove most of the staff from city facilities to a remote working location from their homes. Some are coming in to provide services that can't be done remotely, such as mail sorting, distribution, receiving deliveries, payment, payroll, some IT support, and some public works maintenance tasks that have to be addressed as they arise. So we have limited personnel in our city facilities and out in the community. All our public safety services, police and fire, continue adjusted in terms of masks and gear, but 911 services are continuing to function per normal. Public works actions, we've closed our buildings, our playgrounds, our park restrooms, basketballs, tennis courts, and bocce courts. And I know we've gotten a number of requests from different members of the public to open tennis courts or open a basketball court or a bocce court because they want to play with a family member or whatnot. We're not able to accommodate that. The health order is very specific. These types of activities are not allowed. We've gotten probably even more requests from coaches and business owners who'd like to, who have asked if they could use those facilities to coach clients and conduct classes and those kinds of things. This is also not allowed. So these closures will remain in effect for the duration of the public health orders that we are seeking to honor and enforce here in our community. We've deployed social distancing signage in our parks and on our trails. We've deferred the CIP bid openings and routine work that we could. Some projects that were further along and past that have been more problematic. Councilmember Olbert mentioned one earlier, and certainly respect and understand the point of view that was mentioned. We're in slightly different situation than a member of the general public who might have a project that's been canceled, where it's been canceled through no fault of their own, through as a client, their contractor simply is not allowed to work. For the city, the health order doesn't provide that direction or coverage. It simply says that it's up to us to determine what public projects go forward. And because the state has not changed any of the contract laws that are in place, we would essentially be forced to pay the contractor while the project was being delayed, and those costs could be substantial. And that's why that was one of the primary reasons why the project went forward, in addition to some other legal liability and things that a private project wouldn't have to deal with. We've continued to respond to emergencies as needed and as called in the community and oversee any essential projects that are happening. Things like sewer breaks. We had a water line break, which isn't a city response primarily, but we do have to get out there and make sure that the roadways are open and passable when there's water on the streets and whatnot. And then we're working, as Councilmember Rack talked about earlier, to implement an alternate bulky item collection program where we'd have large container bins where folks can bring those things if they're building up at home until Recology starts their program back up to begin collection. The Sheriff's Office staffing continues to be maintained at normal levels. We continue to reinforce the parameters of the county's health orders with public outreach and education. We continue to go by Home Depot to help educate the day laborers that have congregated there. That is not allowed. We put signboards out and are making those contacts daily to make sure that that message gets out there. It seems to be having an effect. We're working last week, primarily, and the week before, to shut down most of the construction projects in San Carlos There's 2 commercial projects that are still seeking county approval to continue because they're both biotech office laboratory space buildings that believe they're covered under the COVID-19 exception. There are a handful of multifamily projects that are allowed to continue under the health order because they contain affordable housing units. So those are ongoing. And then there's a few projects around town where because of health and safety issues, they're being allowed to continue up to a certain point. One project was at the point where they had dug a large hole to do foundation work, and now they're having to stop. So they need to do work to shore up that hole so it doesn't, cause any slides or damage to neighboring properties, and make the site safe so that they can so that it can be left until they're able to resume work. So you'll see some sporadic construction. We do get calls every day and reports every day of construction happening in town. We're responding to those, and in most instances, letting those contractors know that they are in fact not allowed to continue with that project, and referring them to the county if they believe that they're an essential project and that they're exempt under the order. If the county says that they are, then we'll allow them to continue. We're doing a lot of patrol out in the community, trying to be as highly visible as we can. We've got folks in our parks deterring organized sporting activity and group gatherings and that kind of thing. We haven't had too much of that, but it has occurred several times. So we'll continue to take those calls and send resources out to ensure that those gatherings are dispersed and hopefully don't persist into the future, as we all do our best in our part to honor the social distancing and health guidelines recommended by health experts across really the world. We have had several arrests for theft. Construction site thefts have been on the uptick. There have been some domestic calls with more folks at home. It's unfortunate, but we'll continue to monitor that and to respond as quickly as possible when we get those types of requests. Parks and Recreation, we've canceled our youth center and adult community center facility programming. Those facilities are closed. All recreation programming has been canceled through May 3rd. We've launched a virtual recreation center website through the city's website. If you visit the Parks and Recreation page, you can find those link to those programs. We're engaging with our youth center members through Zoom on a drop-in or call-in Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. We're working with the Carrington Cupboard to expand grocery program and removing any age restrictions or other restrictions that the program had historically had, so that we can make sure that everybody in our community who needs food has the ability to access that. And we've deployed staff to our parks to observe group gatherings and notify police if their presence is needed to discourage whatever's been going on. Community Development sent out 250 notices to residential permit holders, notifying them of the COVID-19 construction restrictions. As I mentioned, some projects will need to complete structural work, such as critical engineering and retaining walls, before they can safely close down those projects. So some limited work will be taking place. We're working closely with the Sheriff's Office, communicating shutdown requirements to permit holders on active sites. Most of our contacts with the contractors in town have been very good. We have had some pushback from a few, and we've encouraged them to shut their job down immediately and then contact the county if they want to make a case for being considered an exempt project under their various categories of the health order. As we mentioned, we'll have one public works project beginning this week, the San Carlos Avenue Pedestrian Improvement Project. We've got several housing projects that are continuing. Those are the affordable housing projects. So if you see some of those mid-size apartment or condo type projects continuing, they are allowed because they have at least 10% of the units in the project are affordable. So they were exempted under the county and state orders. And we're doing our best to keep the community updated on projects that are allowed and not allowed, so that folks have access to that information and try to determine whether or not they want to call in to report a project or not. We continue to do outreach with the community to provide regular updates and support to the community via our website, social media, and the community support newsletter and spotlights. We're overseeing the city hotline, as I mentioned earlier. We're working with the San Carlos Community Foundation on the Neighbor to Neighbor program. We're monitoring social media, trying to respond to any misinformation or questions that come to us via social media, and encouraging the public to contact us with questions, particularly if you see something on social media that doesn't strike you as quite right. We'd be happy to check in with you. It's easier to get the correct information out earlier on before some of the rumors take hold and create uncertainty and panic in the community. We don't want to see that happen. We will be putting out another focus newsletter, as I mentioned earlier, sometime next week to the community, focused on nonprofits and those types of programs that are available to residents in San Carlos, either for them to support or to take advantage of the programming because they have needs. We're continuing to work with the county PIOs to ensure consistency in messaging and other needed support so that we have accurate information across all platforms in the county. We've posted signs and banners at various locations to remind the public about gatherings and the need for social distancing. Signs are up around the perimeter of Home Depot and Milwaukee's parking lot to help discourage those day laborers from gathering there and violating the health order. We've got signs and banners up at all our parks that are open, and the 3 electronic signs that we have with varying messages we move around as needed. We're also utilizing the 101 electronic billboards for messaging and allowing the county to do the same. We've provided some funding to help with groceries, $5,000 that will just kind of continue to roll unless it gets up to my authority, in which case we'll bring it back to the council. We're $5,000 to purchase mask making supplies through the sheriff's office for their efforts to get masks made. $20,000 for the Care and Cover program to help with its food distribution program, and $10,500 to Meals on Wheels for the San Carlos families. And then, of course, you have a couple items on the agenda this evening that you're going to be discussing as well. There are still needs, particularly in the area of personal protective equipment for hospitals here in San Mateo County. So if you have the ability to make that donation or have the ability to contact companies that have available PPE, we'd be very interested to hear from you and to work with you to get that information and that material into the hands of the county and out to our health providers and emergency services providers. The county continues to look for volunteers with medical skills. You can contact the county or the state if you fall into that category. Community members need to continue to stay at home unless they're leaving serves an essential purpose, so you can go out for food or doctor's appointments. They're asking folks, if you're going to go out for recreational purposes, to hike or walk or do that kind of thing, to stay as close to home as you can in your own neighborhood. The beach parking lots are closed. Regional parks have been closed. State parks have been closed. So there's nowhere to park, and you'd be violating the health order if you were to go more than 5 miles from your home for that particular purpose of recreation. So stay close to home and walk in your own neighborhood, visit your local park, that sort of thing. Community members need to wear protective face coverings, masks over their nose and mouths when interacting with others outside their home. And we're asking everybody in the community to follow us, the city, on social media, Nextdoor, Facebook, and Twitter, and our website listed here for all the latest information. If you have questions, you can call the city hotline, which we mailed to everybody's home, or the county hotline at 211 for information and updates. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Do we have some questions of Jeff? Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jeff. Good presentation. Just one quick question, actually, towards the end of your presentation, and it concerns the advisory about wearing face masks whenever somebody is outside. My understanding was that that was a recommended thing, but not a requirement. And I just want to make sure, number one, whether it is in fact a requirement, and if it is, if you happen to remember when it became a requirement.
You know, in this instance, I think I'll have to ask either Greg Rubens or Tara Peterson about that particular item.
That's fine.
Because to be honest, when I read that, it caught me off guard as well.
Me too.
That's probably my fault. This is Tara. It is recommended only. So you're correct, Councilmember Olbert. It's just a recommendation.
Okay, that's fine. As I said, listen, it wouldn't surprise me if we moved in that direction. It's just that I wanted to make sure whether we actually had or not. So thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Anything else, Mark?
I muted myself too soon. No.
All right. Laura. I think you're next, Laura. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Collins. Jeff, just two quick questions. What does PIO stand for?
Public Information Officer.
Great.
Sorry, I thought I was muted.
Okay, and then by my simple math, it appears that the Community Foundation still has about $83,000 left over. Was that $250,000 specifically for COVID response? And if so, do they have plans for the balance? And do you have some sense of what that will be, how that will be allocated?
I had a meeting with them last Thursday, and it sounds like the balance, first of all, the $250,000 was for COVID. It actually all came from one donor. So the donor has been involved with how that funding would be distributed, as you might imagine. And what I understand is the balance of that money likely is going to go towards small business programs, and they just weren't quite sure yet, as of last week, what mechanism that would be the best to help meet that need. I think they're talking to San Mateo County Strong and the Silicon Valley Foundation as possible partners that they could make a donation to. That's a new foundation, and they're not looking really to run their own programs where they would fund things directly or businesses directly. They're looking to give to other organizations that already have that capacity and would be supporting small businesses. So I know that's one goal for the remainder of the money.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the very comprehensive report.
Adam.
Thank you, Mayor Collins. Jeff, thanks again for the great presentation. Just a couple of quick questions, comments. So on the newsletter, you talked about sort of educating the public or letting people know about what's allowed and what's not allowed. Was that, will any of that sort of be in the newsletter? I know that when we're reaching out to people, typically by mail, we find that we get good sort of penetration and response. So that would be one question to start with.
I think that's a good idea. I think we'll definitely have, the highlights of the health orders and recommendations for people included in that newsletter, as we've had graphics and things. So I think we'll want to continue to make sure that message gets out there. So I'll certainly include that within the scope of the newsletter, though the focus, will really be about the nonprofit work and stuff happening.
Great. And then just my second kind of comment was, how is it, in terms of you said that we've got the sheriff's department or our police out. You're here. You got the parks folks at the parks kind of monitoring stuff, and how has the impact of that been? Have we been able to manage that? Are you guys feeling like it's overwhelming in terms of the amount you're getting, or it's something you could manage pretty well? And just as an add-on to that, I'm starting to hear like people are starting to come out in their neighborhoods and sort of do, I don't know, some sort of like happy hour kind of things. Is that maybe some clarification on that too? I mean, there's social distancing, but not and staying in their neighborhoods, and kind of how that might play out.
Yeah. As far as I understand the health order, most of those sort of impromptu social distancing gatherings, and I've seen images of some online, they actually wouldn't be allowed in this county because I think it's anything more than 3 people. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong there.
It's actually no gatherings are allowed.
Okay. I thought, yeah.
Unless there's an exception. And
right. Family members that live together can gather.
Family members who live in the same household can, without a limit, if there's 10 people in one household, they can gather, but someone from outside that household, even if they're from the same extended family, are not allowed to gather with them.
Yeah. Most of the calls that we've been receiving have been along the lines of either like impromptu sporting activities taking place at parks, like pickup soccer game or, football game or something. We have had a couple of examples of organized sports teams getting together for a practice, which is certainly not allowed. And then we've had, just sort of a lot of calls about construction or business type activity that folks suspected was not allowed. And in most instances, they were right. It was not allowed. And so we respond to that. But I have to say, it really has not been overwhelming. It's really, when you think about it, pretty remarkable how our community has really embraced the health order. And I think, as was mentioned earlier, I think Sarah brought it up about the health data and how interesting and hopeful it is that, we're really seeing a change in the numbers in the county to the positive on this. And, that's in no small part, due to, the efforts and activities of our residents and residents in other communities who've, really embraced the health order, understand its purpose, and are really trying to follow the spirit of that. So it's really pretty remarkable how many, how few calls we're getting when you think about it. And so I'm very encouraged by that. And we definitely have the resources right now to keep pace with the activity that's out there. If that changes, we'll be prepared to address it.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And I appreciate That's great to hear that people are sort of, abiding by the order and that we're doing well. So thank you.
All right. Mr. Mayor, may I follow on something that Adam brought up there?
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm asking this mostly because I was curious about a situation that was reported on social media the other day, which caused me to have a somewhat in-depth conversation with Chief Dury. And what I want to make sure I understand is that whether or not, to what extent does the regulation about group interactions cover things that are happening on private property or inside somebody's home? The specific case here was a purportedly large, noisy party in somebody's backyard, which concerned some of the neighbors. And the upshot of the whole thing, and I don't want to put words in Chief Dury's mouth, but if I understood him correctly, the upshot of the whole thing was deputies did go out and check it, but because those types of things are either indoors or, in this case, on private property out of public sight, the enforceability of the rule, if it exists, doesn't apply. So I'd just like to get a better understanding of that, just so when I get asked the next question about that, I'll know what to say.
Okay. I think I'll ask Greg Rubens and Chief Dury to speak to that.
I'll start, Councilmember Olbert. Yeah, the issue, I haven't seen any informational report about the incident, but as I understand it, all of the activity were out of public view, and the allegation or complaint from neighbors was that it was an illegal gathering. The issue when we have that is like any other illegal activity in someone's backyard or inside the house out of view is the sheriff still needs to have probable cause to enter a property, and there's a great body of case law about what constitutes probable cause. And in that case, the deputies on scene felt that they didn't have probable cause to enter. In order to enter under those types of circumstances, the procedure is to get a search warrant. But oftentimes when the deputies show up to inquire about something, the hearing kind of breaks up and it's over before anything like that can happen. So I think that's my understanding what happened here. If there was a gathering, it broke up shortly after the deputies arrived at the property, and they were aware that something was, that a complaint had been made. And I think that's a summary. What I understand happened, but perhaps there's some more granular detail that Chief Dury could add to that.
I do have a few things. Councilmember Olbert, when we spoke the other night on the phone, when the deputy responded, he was already on another hit and run call in the city. And by the time they cleared that scene, he went by and everything was quiet. So there was no loud party, anything that he could see from the street level. And but like I told you before, and Greg Rubens touched on that. Yeah, we would need probable cause to go inside the house. We just couldn't go because someone said there was a loud party. It's we would need to get a search warrant, and no judge would sign a search warrant for the health order and a misdemeanor.
Got it. Well, thank you both for explaining that. And I appreciate your educating me the other day about that, Chief Dury. So
certainly,
you actually understand it correctly. That whatever the regulation is that the county has promulgated, which by the way I support, enforcing it is a somewhat different issue, and it has to go through the filter of probable cause.
But rest assured, we do respond to every health order call we get. We respond. We send a deputy out to every single one to investigate it.
Good. Thank you.
Certainly.
All right. Thank you, Chief. And Jeff, very good presentation. A couple things I just want to make sure I understand in your presentation. It is true that the trails are open. Is that correct? The city trails?
That's correct.
Okay. I did get a text today from one of our more well-known residents who was walking on Big Canyon Trail, and he had this suggestion that maybe it ought to be one way because of people passing each other, and it's, you get into these issues where the trail's narrow and it's impossible to, keep your social distance from people. And I don't know if that's something that Parks and Rec has talked about or what ought to be considered or what, but the resident did have that concern, so I thought I'd pass it on.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably be pretty difficult to enforce.
Okay. Yeah. And then the other thing was with respect to the, people out and about and the social gathering aspect of it. If people are on their property, like their neighbors, and they're sitting on their own driveway and the other one's sitting on their own driveway and it's a narrow street, are we having any issues with that? Or is there an issue if neighbors do that?
I haven't heard any issues with that. And I don't know that, as long as you're 6 feet away and maintaining all the social distancing guidelines, it's hard to imagine what the problem would be. I'll let others chime in if anybody has a different perspective.
No, Mayor Collins, we haven't had any kind of calls for service like that, but like City Manager Maltby said, if the social distancing was beyond the 6 feet, then they could sit there and talk to each other at that distance.
Okay, so then no one reported the mayor last week sitting in his driveway having drinks with his neighbors who were sitting across the street in their driveway.
Not yet, but we are keeping an eye on you, sir.
Yeah.
That's very creative, Mr. Mayor. But I think that the fact that you're across the street might create the distance that's necessary so that it wouldn't be counted as a gathering, even though you were talking with your neighbor across the street, perhaps.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't violating the spirit of the law. All right. Any other questions? Mark, I see your hand up again, or is that from before?
No, that's actually a new one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since we spent the last few minutes rightfully talking about a number of sort of specific issues and concerns, I just wanted to loop back and make sure I understood something I think I heard Jeff say, which is it's early days to tell, but it looks like the very impactful constraints that we've asked the community to adopt, which almost everybody has, actually has been having an effect. It's not like we're out of the woods yet, as I understand it from the various reports from the county.
Yeah.
But there is a benefit to everything that's been going on, and that actually is good news. And I just like to confirm that, or have you reconfirm that, if it's correct.
That is in fact correct.
Well, that's great because, not only is it light potentially at the end of the tunnel, but it's a good reminder for people what the value proposition is, which however painful it is, we're actually getting something for it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know about the other council members, but the emails I'm getting are any indication we're generally doing all right. We have a few complaints here and there, but it's more wishful thinking of they wish they could open up the tennis courts or the soccer field or something like that. But the initial complaints seem to have died down a bit. Okay, let's see. I don't see any more hands raised on this. Unless there's anything else, I'll move ahead to item 9. This is a study session 9A.
Mr. Mayor, do we have to have the public have an
do we need a public comment?
Or do we?
Crystal, is there anybody who has a comment?
I'm going to just put the slide up so we can give the public a few minutes to call in with those comments now.
Okay. Once again, if anyone has any would like to make a comment on this report, you can call in on the number on your screen and please enter the meeting ID. And once we see that you have dialed in, we'll put you in the waiting room. And if there's no one waiting, you'll be able to talk right away. Crystal, I don't know how long the delay is from the time we speak to the time it shows up on TV.
Sometimes about a 15 to 20, 30-second delay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
A few more seconds.
All right. So are we good? No calls?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any calls.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We'll now move on to item 9, study session, discuss and direct staff concerning a moratorium on commercial evictions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the staff report that you see in your packet. There's been a lot of activity in the state about residential and commercial evictions. The discussion started pretty early in the crisis, but on March 16th, the governor issued an executive order that essentially authorized local agencies to take action on residential and commercial evictions. Under that authority of that order, the County of San Mateo issued a countywide order, including in the cities, prohibiting residential evictions for non-payment of rent, where a resident can show that they were unable to pay rent due to loss of job or other impacts from COVID-19. it also created a mechanism that the property owner was to, as in providing their the notice of late payment of rent or 3-day notice that gives the tenant time to show that they were impacted by COVID-19. And then it created a mechanism during the moratorium. It wasn't a forgiveness of the rent, but it gave the tenant time to pay the unpaid rent that was essentially a delayed payment of that rent, and then they could be back into compliance with their lease. The county did not at that time, even though the governor's order authorized it, the county did not take any action on commercial tenancies at that time. The other cities took up the idea statewide, including in Southern California. In San Mateo County, the first city to take action was the city of San Mateo, which on the 23rd of March issued passed an urgency ordinance that takes effect immediately that dealt with small business tenants. Their definition of small tenant was someone who had 25 million in gross revenue, which was the same number that San Francisco used. Other cities and counties include Burbank, Marin County, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Santa Clara County, City of San Diego, and San Diego County. And then on just recently last week, on the 8th, South San Francisco passed an ordinance that was sort of a blend between the county's ordinance and the city of San Mateo's ordinance. They used the $25 million number. The county on the 24th of March, they did an urgency order dealing with commercial tenancies that had a much lower threshold of $2.5 million to be considered a small business and have the protection of the ordinance. And it had similar to what San Mateo did. It had a process for how if you couldn't pay the rent, you would have to prove that you were affected and impacted by COVID-19 and were unable to pay the rent for that reason. Enforcement of all the ordinance had in common that enforcement violation would be a misdemeanor, and it provided that a tenant who was served with a complaint for unlawful detainer could use the non-compliance with the ordinance as a defense to the action. And that's important because once it gets into court, it's not something that the city is involved in. So the idea behind these ordinances is to give the tenants an ability to show a defense that, hey, the landlord didn't comply with these provisions of the moratorium or the order, as the case may be, and then they could potentially defend the action and be able to maintain possession of the property until the landlord was in compliance. Then on March 3rd, it moves pretty fast statewide. So on March 31st, the governor then decided to issue his own statewide moratorium on residential evictions. So very similar to what the county enacted countywide, but the county ordinance applies in the county of San Mateo, but now all across the state, wherever there's a residential eviction being considered where someone couldn't pay their rent because of COVID, they have a defense now, and those evictions can't go forward. And if that wasn't enough, on Monday, April 6th, the Judicial Council issued 11 emergency rules that have the effect of preventing any unlawful detainer actions from being considered by court. So it's actually another layer of protection. The emergency orders by the emergency rules by the Judicial Council took effect immediately and expired 90 days from the termination of the emergency orders by the governor. So that, in my opinion, effectively would prevent any kind of evictions, residential or commercial, until the end of the year. Now, they wouldn't have the additional protections that South San Francisco and San Mateo put into their ordinances about notice and deferred payment payment plan if they were behind in their rent. But it does provide a pretty powerful tool to prevent any kind of evictions. And then finally, the sheriff is not currently processing any eviction orders in residential or commercial settings, and that's in response to the COVID crisis as well. Now, there's some help for commercial tenants in the CARES Act that was enacted on March 31st. That authorized, and it's been in the paper and in the news media, that there's $350 billion in forgivable loans for businesses to cover payroll, healthcare, salaries, interest on mortgages, and rent and utilities, and other business-related debt obligations. The loans, the amount of the loan, though, is determined by a factor of the payroll of the business. So the rule is 2.5 times of the payroll of the business during the 90-day period that this deferral is supposed to take place. So in other words, if the business says I have a payroll of $200,000, then they could get $250,000 in loans from the Small Business Administration through their bank, but they can use that money for any of the purposes I just stated during the time. And then at the end, to have the loan forgiven, all they need to do is show that they've spent the money on those approved uses. So it's a pretty generous act, and it's intended to bridge the loss of income that small businesses have had nationwide. It's been in the news that there's still negotiations about adding some further funding to the program, because it looks like in spite of that being a pretty big number, it's not enough for the nationwide needs of all the small businesses that have been impacted by COVID-19. This is a study session, so you're not taking any action tonight. We're asking you to consider whether you want to put a commercial moratorium on a future meeting through an urgency ordinance. As you might recall from prior urgency ordinances the council's considered, it takes 4 votes to pass an urgency ordinance that would take effect immediately. To go through the regular process, it's the process you're used to seeing is an ordinance has 2 readings and then it becomes effective 30 days after the second reading, and those ordinances only take 3 votes to pass. So with that, I've concluded my report, and I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, Greg, I think Mark has a question or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, the basic question I have, and I want to make sure I understand it a little bit better, is you did mention that some of the local ordinances adopted by South San Francisco and San Mateo do have a few additional safeguards and protections built into them relative, compared to some of the other things that you were citing. Could you go through those again in a little bit more detail and sort of, I'm trying to understand the value proposition, if you will, of what they are providing versus the cost, so to speak, of going through the emergency ordinance process.
Right. Thank you, Councilmember Olbert. Yeah, the public, if they're looking at the agenda, they can see in the staff report on packet page 38 or 2 of the staff report for item 9A, San Mateo's urgency ordinance, and they're not all identical, but they have the same theme. Is if you are sick with COVID-19, caring for a household or family member who is sick, or have suffered a layoff, loss of hours, or other income reduction resulting from business closure or other economic impacts, or if you've been compelled to quarantine, and if you have extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses from COVID-19, and the last one is if you have childcare needs arising from school closures so that you couldn't work. Those are defenses that allow you to ask for this rent deferral to your landlord. And that applies in both the commercial and the residential tenancies settings in San Mateo. And so the difference between San Mateo and the county primarily is some of the time frames are a little different, and the amount of if you're a tenant in the county, it applies in just the county areas, and it's only $2.5 million of gross receipts is the threshold for you to qualify. San Mateo and South San Francisco have $25 million for you to qualify for those types of protections. So that's the biggest difference, I think, in the ordinances. Now, the statewide regulations and especially the emergency rules that the Judicial Council passed, they don't have those additional protections, but they do have the certainty that there's no possibility of an eviction for at least probably the next 8 to 9 months. But there's no feature of payment of your deferred a deferred rent amount. That's not in the state emergency rules.
So I guess I'm still trying to parse that difference a little bit. I mean, the Judicial Council stuff, broadly speaking, strikes me as a process control. Basically, it says, well, look, hey, whatever the law would allow the various parties to do, we're just not going to let any action take place for some period of time. It sounds like the local ordinances and the county ordinances actually create, and I'll use probably the term incorrectly here, create an affirmative defense which says that even if somebody were to bring an action against a party who met one of the requirements, perhaps after the Judicial Council allowed actions to proceed, they would be unable to do that because as a matter of regulation or law, if you will, they would not, the landlord would not be able to pursue the tenant. So if I'm getting it right, it does sound like there's a little bit of a difference there. One is process, one is sort of more fundamental. But I'm not a lawyer, so I don't.
Yeah. Well, one is creating or attempts to create a right where it doesn't exist right now, which is this deferred payment right. It's not only the defense lies in the fact that you qualify and the landlord didn't provide you with certain notices that they were required to, or didn't allow you to defer the rent, then that would be a defense. With the emergency rules from the Judicial Council, what that really means is when the governor's order ends and then 90 days have passed, the landlord could still, if a tenant fell behind in their rent on the commercial side, or the residential side under that order, they would not have that defense of a process defense, and the lawsuit could have been filed, and then it would just proceed from the summons would be then issued, and the service would start then. So in effect, if it went to the end of the year, an eviction couldn't even happen until 2021, really, because that would happen. Now, the difference between the two, if a city imposing this right on to providing for a right to the for tenants creates some risk to the city if it's later attacked for different reasons. But it's just a matter of what your goal is. I think if your goal is to provide this extra additional assistance to tenants to respond to this extraordinary circumstance, then that's something that other cities have done, and they've evaluated that issue of risk. But the background is that tenants are not going to be removed from their homes for a very long time right now because of the crisis.
Right. Thank you. If I had to summarize all that, and I'll turn the microphone over here, then the actions that the county and some of the other cities have taken actually creates, as you said, a right, or seeks to create a right, which would protect people in, for lack of a better term, perpetuity. So they are in fact different. They do in fact potentially have some value. So that's something we'll have to consider.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that there's some time limits in the ordinances. The right lasts during the course of the urgency ordinance. So once the urgency ordinance goes away, then and the emergency ordinance is based upon the governor's orders, then that right goes away. So it's not in perpetuity. It lasts for the length of the emergency.
Got it. But you can't bring an action for something that happened during the term of the emergency order, basically, because the right protects you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sarah?
Ron, I just have 2 questions for you, Greg. One, I'm wondering if you can just walk us through a little bit how you got to the date of the end of 2020 as when the eviction could potentially occur. Just kind of walk us through
Sure.
that. And then also, could you just discuss a little bit more detail the risks that we would be facing if we were to proceed with this proposal?
Yeah. Okay. On the first question, I do not think that based upon the facts as I understand them, that the emergency is going to be lifted for another 90 days or so at a minimum. That'd probably be a really great result for the state and the nation if the emergency ended 90 days from now. And then since the order takes effect, or since the emergency regulations apply for 90 days past that date, the first time anybody could file have a complaint served on any tenant would be towards the end of the year, like in late November and December. And then by the time all those cases got through the court system, because there would probably be many that were all deferred for all this time, and there's unlawful detainer actions going on at the court every day, so there'd be a big backlog of cases. And so that would really just push any actual eviction of a tenant well into next year. That's an estimate. I mean, I suppose it could go more quickly if somebody was really good and diligent, but I just don't see how it would work that way. And then the second question, now I forgot your second question, excuse me.
Just to go into a little more detail about the risks that the city could face by passing something like
the risk, yeah. Well, I think these types, this is sort of a ground that has never, there's no cases that talk about regulations that might cause a landlord to not be able to evict somebody for an extended period of time. And on the commercial side, since we already have control for some rent, unlawful detainer, eviction relief for residential tenants, I'm going to focus on the commercial side. And commercial tenancies are a little different animal than residential tenancies. They're multi-year tenancies in many cases. They sometimes contain business terms that are not really the same as the residential tenancies that are typically for 1 year and then turn into a month-to-month after that. So, and then commercial tenancies are usually for bigger amounts than residential tenancies. So the rent control issues raise the issue of a hypothetical where some landlord who had a commercial tenancy decided was not able to collect rent and was not able to find a new tenant for a space. Maybe they had a tenant lined up. There's just an issue there that maybe they'd have a claim. There's obviously a lot of defenses too. So there's an emergency and there's an order in place. And I think most of the cities that have enacted it have evaluated those types of risks and determined that the risk was not large enough, or was too remote, or the harm to the residences and businesses were so significant that they were willing to pass an ordinance in spite of any kind of risk there might be. I think your council member.
Sorry about that. Sarah, I assume your questions are answered?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Adam. Hello, Adam.
Thank you. I'm here. Thank you. Greg, so I had two questions, but one of them you answered on the, I guess, on the liability and kind of the risk aspect. I mean, I mean, you pretty well covered that with Sarah, but, and then this may be for you or might be for Jeff or Al, I don't know, but have we, what have we heard from the business community that this is an issue or a concern for them at this point? I mean, have we heard from any of the businesses that they're concerned about getting evicted or worried about at this point?
I'm not aware of any, but Al may have heard from different groups or business members.
Yeah, I haven't heard about any concerns over evictions. I've heard people concerned that they want somebody to pay their rent, but not because they're in the process or being threatened with eviction.
I haven't heard a thing yet.
Yeah, that's the only question I had, because I assumed Jeff, Greg, you had nothing more to add on the risk side, so that's the only question I had.
Yeah, well, there's in the absence, there's one other aspect to under the law. There's actually some recent cases on what constitutes an urgency, and that's another issue that I didn't mention before. But in the absence of a lot of evidence of people that are about to be evicted or being evicted, there's an issue there too. That especially in light of the emergency regulations from the Judicial Council, that there aren't going to be any evictions. That's a legal risk, if you will, that whether or not there's an urgent need to pass an urgency ordinance.
Okay, I am informed that we have a member of the public that would like to speak. Are they ready to go, Crystal?
I'm pulling them up right now. Caller, phone number ending in 637. Thank you for calling into the San Carlos Council meeting. You will have approximately 2 minutes to address the council. If you'd like to, please state your name for the record before providing your public comments. Thank you.
Christine Thorson. Christine Thorson.
Okay, go ahead and please proceed.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I applied for my PPP loan today, and I think I'm a little confused about the landlord situation. So the situation with the PPP loan is that it does include your rent for a 2-month period of time, but there's a formula that has to be used. It's not too complicated, but it's complicated enough. Eventually what happens is 75% of the loans that you get under the PPP CARES Act has to be spent on payroll. Then you have to prove the rest that is to be forgivable for your rent, utilities, etc. So I'm going to be writing a letter to my landlord, and I'd like to know if the information you've provided tonight is going to be published somewhere so I can cite it in my letter to my landlord, asking for some kind of deferral or something, because there's been no communication at all.
Crystal, did we have any other members of the public that would like to speak?
I'm not seeing any at this moment.
All right. Jeff or Greg, could you give us any guidance or feedback on the caller's questions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to if I understood. First, the council wouldn't be taking any action tonight, so there wouldn't be anything, any ordinance put in place for this person to cite in their application. I think maybe there's a misunderstanding there.
I think maybe what you were talking about as far as the Department of Justice and that protection.
Yeah, this is City Attorney. There is a staff report that you can get online that has a summary of the laws, including the emergency rules from the Judicial Council. That might be what you're referring to.
Okay.
And I think it's pretty clearly stated there. And then you can go to the Judicial Council website, and that order, the full order is there. I was focusing on the evictions protections portion of the order, but there's other parts of the order as well. But it's pretty clear.
Okay, because under this loan program, it's a little bit of a catch-22 in a sense that if you don't make some kind of an agreement with your landlord and you don't pay your rent, then you end up owing it in the CARES package. That's the way it's working.
Right. Yeah.
So.
There's some. It's pretty complex. So.
It is. It's pretty scary too. So, well, thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it, and thank you for the reference.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for calling.
Bye.
All right. So, discussion. Just wondering where we want to take this. Or do we want to take it at all?
Through the chair, just an observation. I think, as I recall, this was an item that Adam, you had asked to have discussed. I'd just be curious about your perspective on it.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, thank you, Councilmember Olbert and Mayor Collins. So I think, based on kind of what, when a couple weeks ago when we talked about this, or even I guess it was like 3 weeks because we've got an odd week this in terms of the cycle for meetings. I think the fact that we've gotten more information from Greg and Jeff in terms of where the legal parameters are right now, and my inclination is that we would hold off on this for right now, given that we don't see a huge need in our community, and that perhaps focusing more on the funding aspect of things and where we might be supportive on the funding side for small businesses might be a better focus for our resources and our time. That's my general assumption around this. I think if things change and we're starting to hear a lot about it, then it could be something we could take up again on short notice.
Okay. Sarah?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo what Adam said. I agree with his perspective. I wanted to add just a comment that over the last couple of weeks, I've been listening to business owners and their fears and frustrations. We also had the opportunity to review a survey done by the San Mateo County Economic Development Association, and they surveyed 90 business owners here in town. And that information from that survey was quite sobering for me. And it seems like what's coming up time and again is that businesses haven't been able to negotiate more favorable terms with their landlords. And it seems like it's kind of for two reasons. Either one, the tenants just haven't asked their landlords yet for assistance. They've been hoping that the landlords would reach out to them. Or they have reached out and the landlord has said no. And tonight, I just want to express that I am very disappointed to hear of landlords that are flat out saying no. I think that when we are faced with a global pandemic like this, we all need to help each other out. And I think giving a tenant a little breathing room in a way that works for both the landlord and the tenant is not asking for too much right now. So I do think that some outreach is needed to our small business community to let them know that the ball is in their court and they need to take the initiative and ask. And my perspective is that after that outreach, and if a significant number of small business owners ask and that the answer is still no, then I would be open to revisiting this. And I would also want to hear the perspective of our commercial landlords and the mom and pop landlords in town, just to kind of understand the full story before moving forward with this. Thank you.
Jeff or Greg, is that something that maybe the chamber might already be engaged in, or we can maybe ask them to reach out to the business owners?
I mean, I think we definitely could do that, right, Jeff? I mean, that.
Yeah, we'll share that information and request with the chamber, and you know, we're having frequent communications with that group as well, and so we'll communicate it ourselves in addition to anything the chamber might do.
Okay.
As I understand it from a call last week with Samsida, and we're going to try to get Samsida on your next agenda to do a presentation. They've been, you know, doing a lot of these business programs in the county. And one of the things that they said is it's difficult to put information out right now on the business issue because things are evolving so quickly with the laws that are being passed at the state and federal level, and how the subsequent state and federal agencies are interpreting those laws and putting those programs into place. And then many of those programs also then have to interact with private financial institutions. And so there's quite a bit of details that still need to be worked out in practice, as I think was sort of reflected in that caller that we just heard from about you know, the fact that it's a little confusing and difficult. And that's definitely what we're hearing from the other folks that are monitoring, helping putting these programs in place, that there's still a lot of questions that they need to understand in terms of how these are going to work, and, you know, where the liability for the lending lies, and guarantees and all those kinds of things.
Definitely an uncharted territory.
Yeah, definitely uncharted territory.
Laura, you had a question?
Yeah, just a comment. So just in response to the discussion that's being had here, so thank you for the floor. From my perspective, you know, I also looked at the data set, and I think, just generally speaking, I think this global pandemic has hurt every business. I don't know that there is a size business that has been spared. You know, the grocery stores, which is an essential business I go into, and I observe that the number of people who are allowed to go in at any given time is markedly smaller than pretty much any other time I've been in it. So kind of where we draw the line for, you know, how we define small business, I think would be a big question mark that I have as we move forward in this. The first tranche of money, from what I'm understanding from that first Paycheck Protection Plan, went very quickly. And for example, Wells Fargo closed the window on lending before it even seemed to open. And then they finally reopened it again. And I understand Jackie Spear spoke at a county update last week that another $1 trillion are to be considered for funding for the CARES program, and another $251 billion for small business. When I looked at the data for the San Carlos respondents, you know, the things that came out to me that they needed help with were effectively financial assistance to pay rent, as you mentioned, Sarah, in addition to make payroll, because without the ability to make payroll or keep people on payroll, right, they're not going to qualify for that paycheck protection plan. The thing that really struck me, though, is that just by my rough analysis, a full 1/3 of those businesses describe themselves as being essential and are still having difficulty doing this, so or making ends meet. Obviously, our shopping patterns and habits and our use of services have changed, you know, quite significantly and dramatically. So I would agree that I think it would be important for us to see how we could collect the voice of the small business owner. I think San Carlos is a highly engaged community, but that small business community, I think, has been harder to reach for any number of reasons. So if there was some way, for example, the chamber could help us understand, you know, not just what their members are thinking and need, but kind of the businesses beyond. But I think this problem is very complex, and you know, if we can all share in each one of us do our part to help each other get through it, I think is really the North Star here. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Laura. Mark, your thoughts?
He's accidentally muted, I think, there.
Oh,
Yeah.
I guess
Mark?
yes. Can you hear me? Yes.
yeah.
I was asking you all to practice your lip reading skills. So, just a brief comment to share with the dais, and then an observation about the discussion we're having. Barbara, my wife, is involved with supporting a not-for-profit organization that has some employees, and so they were applying for some of these support programs. And to make a long story short, I'm sorry to have to say that not all the banks are, from my perspective, actually playing kosher with the rules of the program. For example, there are documented cases of where a bank did not open the window for people applying, except in case you were a really special customer of theirs. And then they gave you early access to it. And then the rest of the people kind of like, well, sorry, too bad for you. So I just wanted to share that with people because that's an additional complication that's clearly outside of the rules, or at least the intent of the rules, that could certainly negatively impact any business, particularly smaller one. The observation I wanted to make is it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, the general sense is that we want to stand ready to do something if, in fact, there ends up being problems down the road. But right now, the main desire is to make sure that people have time, businesses have time to work things out with their lenders and landlords. And if the issues that we're trying to preserve is time, then all the things Greg was saying that basically block stuff from happening, that accomplishes that. If we wanted to actually go beyond that and provide some financial support or financial protection, I don't think that's necessarily what those process blocks actually do. But it doesn't sound like that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to buy people time, and other authorities have done that for us. So it sounds like we move on from this one, but that's just my perspective.
No, I think that's a good summary. That's well summed up. Okay, any other thoughts before we move on to the next item? Okay, we're going to move on to new business 10A, consideration of adopting a resolution establishing a tenant assistance program, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement designating Samaritan House as program administrator and appropriating $112,000 from the housing fund to the fund said program.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. This is Martin Romo, Economic Development and Housing Manager. Before you this evening is a resolution that would effectively create a new tenant assistance program, which would assist our city's renters, residential renters impacted by the current novel coronavirus situation. Just changing the slide here. So the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has led to requests being made to the city for assistance with residential rental payments. We currently do not have a program that can provide this type of direct financial assistance. However, the Housing Division does in fact provide grants to nonprofit organizations that provide this type of support to our community. One such organization that the city has proudly worked with over several years is Samaritan House. Samaritan House is a San Mateo County-based not-for-profit organization that provides services such as rental assistance payments, emergency shelter, food assistance, and other vital community services. This evening, we are joined at this meeting by Latrice Taylor, who is a representative of Samaritan House, and who will be available to speak more about Samaritan House and its programs after this presentation. So given the city's successful history with Samaritan House and the organization's experience with administering these types of tenant assistance programs, and they're currently assisting the city of Menlo Park and the county of San Mateo with programs that they've recently adopted. Staff is recommending that the council establish a tenant assistance program, that Samaritan House be deemed the program administrator, and that $100,000 plus a 12% administrative fee be appropriated from the BMR Housing Fund to fund this program. The proposed tenant assistance program guidelines would be as followed. The TAP, Tenant Assistance Program, funding contribution would be of these $100,000 plus the administrative cost, a 12% fee for the administrator to be the fiscal agent. The TAP would be capable of accepting additional private donations to supplement funding and public donations to supplement funding. TAP funding grants would not exceed $5,000 per household. The funding grants would only be able to be used for rent payments. And the eligibility for households would be based on the following. Household income would not be able to exceed 120% of the area median income. Households would need to demonstrate an inability to pay rent due to COVID-19. The household must currently occupy a legal unit that is within the incorporated San Carlos limits. And also the household must have a current and valid lease agreement. The TAP funds would be dispersed on a first come, first served basis for households that do meet the eligibility just listed. And just to reiterate, this resolution is three-pronged, and it's through requests to be able to A, establish this program, B, assign Samaritan House to be the administrator, and C, to appropriate $112,000 from the BMR Housing Fund to fund the program. Thank you. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions. And again, we are also joined by Latrice from Samaritan House, who can help provide further insight on the organization and this program.
Good evening. I'm Latrice Taylor, the Associate Director of Programs and Services at Samaritan House. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you today. And we truly appreciate the support that you've already been providing to residents in the city. Hopefully many of you know about us. If not, Samaritan House has been around over 45 years as the emergency safety net agency for Central San Mateo. We have provided free services to those who need the most basic of food, clothing, and shelter. The most basic things that people need to be able to survive on a daily basis. We have already been administering funds on behalf of the city of Menlo Park, but we also we serve as the fiscal agent for all 8 core service agencies that cover the whole county. So that means that anyone who seeks financial assistance in this county, if it's approved by another core agency, all of those requests do cross my desk, and we actually have to follow whatever are the guidelines that are outlined for the contracts. And we also follow whatever auditing purposes are laid out. And then we're the ones who actually send out the checks to your landlords and owners, or to PG&E if it's for utility assistance, or if it's car repair. Whatever is that financial assistance that we can take care of, that comes from our office, and that covers the whole county. Some of the other services we provide, we have 2 free clinics. One is located on 39th Street. We run Safe Harbor Shelter, which helps 90 single adult male and females to be off the streets. We're also the largest partner of Second Harvest Food Bank in the county. We provide over 1.4 million meals, hot and cold meals, every year. So we're the ones who are doing your groceries. For people who need to get their groceries, they come to us, and they can save at least $300 per month just getting their meats, their dry goods, their milk on a weekly basis. We also provide hot meals for those who are homebound, or for after-school programs and senior facilities. And even now, we're starting to partner with different organizations, such as the Street Medicine Team. We are providing bag lunches, so when the medical team goes out to the streets, they're able to give meals from our kitchen out to those who are in need of food. So those are just some of the things that Samaritan House already provides. And we are really excited about being able to help administer this fund if that's what you so vote on and choose to do. And if there are any questions, I'm here. Hopefully I can answer some of those.
Sorry, Latrice, thank you. We have, I think we actually, before we get to council questions, I believe that there is someone who would like to speak. And before we move on or get to that person, if I think we're going to have a public comment screen come up a second here.
Sorry, I'm having some technical issues with freezing up here.
Well, while you're doing that, Crystal, is the speaker ready to talk?
Yes, let me go ahead and admit them into the room.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, caller, phone number ending in 960. Thank you for calling into the San Carlos City Council meeting. If you could please lower your volume of the meeting behind you, that would be appreciated. You're going to notice a delay in the speaking, so that might help. You will have approximately 2 minutes to address the council. If you like, please state your name for the record before providing your comments. Thank you.
Alex Melendrez. Good evening, Mayor Collins and members of the San Carlos State Council. My name is Alex Melendrez, and I am with the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. We work with communities and their leaders to produce and preserve quality, affordable homes. I am speaking on item 10A, the resolution establishing a tenant assistance program with Samaritan House as a program administrator. We applaud and support the city of San Carlos's efforts to support the most vulnerable individuals and families in our communities. Samaritan House's reputation for generosity and providing vital assistance in these great times, in all great times of need, are pretty well established, and we also thank them as well. We would ask that the funds be available to all San Carlos residential tenants, regardless of their citizenship status. This public health emergency treats everyone equally, and no one should go unsheltered. Please pass the resolution establishing San Carlos's tenant assistance program with the assurance that there will be no prerequisite based on citizenship. Thank you very much for your ongoing efforts and leadership in protecting our community.
Thank you, Alex. Just a reminder to the public, you can call in if you are placed in the queue. You will be reminded by the city clerk that you are up. You can go ahead and call in if someone's already speaking. Crystal, do we have any other speakers lined up?
Yes, we do have one more. I'll go ahead and admit them in.
Okay.
Caller, phone number ending in 327. Thank you for calling in. If you could please lower your volume of the meeting behind you, so, that would be appreciated. You have approximately 2 minutes to address the council. And if you'd like, please state your name for the record before providing your comment. Thank you. Caller 960. Oh. It looks like we have just been disconnected with that caller. If we can give maybe another minute for them to call back if there was some issue on that end, that'd be great.
I'm wondering if maybe we might have a couple questions while they're maybe trying to call back in.
Okay. I'll let you know when they call back in.
All right, that'd be great. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And by the way, feel free to, I had a couple of questions, so feel free to interrupt me if you want to pass the baton or if we get a caller coming in. All my questions, I think, are for Martin. Let me start by asking, I would like to get a little insight into where the $100,000 figure came from. And not that the two programs are need to be parallel, but I have to admit, when I was reading through the staff reports, it was kind of interesting looking at the tenant assistance program proposed at $100,000 and the commercial assistance program supposed to be between $100,000 and $400,000. So I was trying to get a feel for where the $100,000 figure come from, and is there a reason why it may end up being smaller than the small business assistance program?
Yeah, so the amount that we set here is kind of the first point that we're setting it at. It's based off of it's a similar model the city of Menlo Park adopted, and because it's meant to be kind of seen as initial seed money that can be supplemented by additional donations. It was modeled essentially to be kind of the starting place that could then be supplemented if reviewing how much interest we got for the program, at which point we could come back to the council to make an additional appropriation. That being said, there's nothing that precludes us from making an amendment to.
I do? Okay.
To the way it's written now to increase the amount.
Okay. Thank you, Martin. Ron, is the caller available? Should I hold off my second question?
Actually,
Crystal,
yes, we do have a caller calling in right now.
All right.
You ready to let them in?
Are they ready to speak?
I believe so. Let me go ahead and admit
All
them in.
right. Well, why don't we go ahead and take that call?
Good evening, caller ending in 351. Thank you for calling in. If you could please lower your volume on your meeting behind you, that'd be great. You'll have approximately 2 minutes to address the council, and if you'd like, please state your name prior to proceeding. Thank you.
Hello, my name is David Tubman. I'm a renter in San Carlos on Chestnut Street. Just calling for a quick saying I'm very much in favor to open up this fund and fund it through the mechanism as described. As everybody knows, this is the low market rate, below median income type of folks who are hit harder because those sorts of incomes typically come with jobs that you can't even work from home. So they're likely to be struggling more, like exponentially more so than those of us. For the record, I wouldn't qualify for this. So yeah, I encourage the council to approve this fund so we can start the outreach for it and dispersing them as soon as possible, so we can give relief as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you for your call.
Did we have another caller?
I think that is it for this item.
Okay. All right. And Mark, did you have some more comment you wanted to provide, or shall I move on?
Actually, I did have one more question. Thank you, if I may.
Sure.
Again, for Martin. So I noticed that one of the parameters of the proposal is that it basically parallels the affordable housing rule in terms of 120% of median income. Is there a statutory, and this may be a Greg question too, frankly, but is there a statutory requirement that the program, if we were to set it up, has to follow that? Or for example, could we say we would like, if, let's say, 80% of the people on our program are below 100%, could we say we would like 80% of the support to go to those people? In other words, sort of steer the money in parallel with where the need actually is, as opposed to just doing it on a purely income basis.
I'll take the first stab at this question, and Greg, maybe you can jump in if I'm saying anything that's not correct. But the reason we pegged it at the 100, we simply set a cap at the 120% AMI amount, and that's based on the fact that the funds that we're requesting are sourced from the BMR Housing Fund. I believe that Menlo City, when they crafted this, their similar program actually set it at 150%, and I would defer to Samaritan House, to Latrice to comment on this, but I think it could be structured in many ways. I think the way that we initially structured it here for your consideration is to, again, try to serve and provide these emergency funding to the households that are likely most to need the funds in this kind of first iteration of funding. As the caller mentioned, it tends to be these households which are most at risk and are most likely to, have lost their jobs or not have the capability of working from home, and are likely to be the first households within San Carlos that need to access the funds. In terms of how we want to create subcategories with how the funds should be spent, that is within the capacity of the council, we can amend these guidelines to be a bit more prescriptive. I simply said the initial recommendation as a cap, but we can certainly organize it in a way so that perhaps it serves, extremely low at a certain percentage and, moderate at a certain percentage, or however we want to cut it. But the way we've structured it is really to set a cap, and then once people meet those eligibility criteria, we hand it over to Samaritan House to go through and make the selection for who they would award the grants to.
If I could also speak to that. It should be said that the way that we determine eligibility, if you will, for any of our funding sources, because I don't know if you're aware, but we are the administrator for Season of Sharing funds, for Measure K dollars, and we are going to be the administrator, I believe, for the San Mateo Strong Fund as well. What we always look at is how are we going to be able to help people as long as is possible. So most funds ask us to look at what has happened in the past 30 days. So when the previous caller said it might not mean him, well, if his job was affected by COVID, 30 days from now, if he has no paycheck, yes, he'd be eligible. That's how we determine eligibility, based on what you had in the past 30 days. Yes, you do want to look at the cap at 120%, or it could be 60% or wherever you set it. But if people don't have an income within a month's time, everyone's going to fit that category. So it's a great place to start. And I will say that some of your residents have already called us. We've already started looking at them for other funds while we were waiting on this, as well as the San Mateo Strong. And we've been able to say, well, you know what, if you just got paid last week, maybe that means you come back next month when you can't pay your rent. So we don't want to just automatically start giving away money because people meet a certain cap today. We want to look at, can you truly afford your rent now? If not, we can continue to look at your eligibility for down the road, because we honestly don't know how long this is going to last.
Okay, thank you. That essentially answers I want to think about that a little bit more, but I think that essentially answers my question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Laura.
Great, thank you, Mayor Collins. So question with respect to, it sounds like there's already been some people who've come forward to ask for support here. I'd be curious to know how many. In addition, what are the staff's plans for communicating this program back out to the community should this pass this evening?
Latrice, would you like to speak to the communications you've had from our residents so far?
Today, I do not have numbers. I know of 2, but as far as how many have come since this started last month, I'd have to go back and get that number for you specifically. I do remember that there were 2 at least. For communications, I was even thinking of some of the previous meeting about how are you getting information out to the community. The county has already started putting out a lot of information as far as what resources to call. And they put out a lot of the listings of all the core agencies. They've put out what are those resources you need to know, especially for county offices, human service agency offices that are now closed, or where do you need to go for legal services, because I was hearing that as well. So I wanted to actually forward that information to you so you could actually disperse that to the residents. And we're just continuing as we find out there's a need. We're making partnerships with other organizations all throughout the county, and as well as throughout the city of San Carlos. So we're just continuing to find other avenues of trying to get the word out, because one thing that anyone should know is anyone who is a resident of this county, the first thing I would always say is call your local core agency. And we're the gateway into all the services for the whole county. So if you don't know what that resource is, call Samaritan House or call the next core. And that's what our role is. That's what we're contracted to do, is to find out that resource on behalf of your residents.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. And Latrice, thank you very much. That was very helpful. Very helpful. Sarah. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Thank you.
Easy to forget.
I was trying to lower my hand, but I'll do that next. Latrice, I wanted to thank you so much for being with us tonight and for all of the hard work that Samaritan House is doing in our community. It's just, I know that there is a huge demand for your services right now, and I'm sure you're really burning the midnight oil, helping everyone, and I want to thank you for your service. I have two questions. Is the money that we would be giving tonight, would that be termed on the basis of the emergency order? Meaning, you know, if we don't use the funds during this health emergency, what would happen to them? I assume that they're going to be all used up within a matter of weeks, which is the ideal circumstance, but what happens if they're not? And then I wanted to ask about the citizenship question that came in via public comment as well, please.
For any funds not dispersed, we would turn back for your guidance as to, would you want to continue as long as there's a need with relation to COVID, or if you decide we want to just help our residents with the remaining funds after this passes, that's fine as well. So we leave that in your hands to determine how you would like to move forward with the funds, because they will be designated for residents of San Carlos only. As for the residency status, I will be quite frank, we do not ask that question. Let me correct that. It does appear on our intake form purely for demographic information, but it is not required for anyone to answer that question. We serve anyone who walks through our doors.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Adam.
Thank you, Mayor Collins. And Latrice, thanks, and Martin. So Martin, my, I guess the question for you, do you have a sense for, I mean, I know that things are changing rapidly, but what, if I were to ask you this question a month ago or 6 weeks ago, do you know how many families we might be talking about that could qualify for these funds if we were to go ahead and approve them in the city? I mean, we're talking like, are there 100 families, 200?
It's difficult to say. I will note, though, however, that with the growth of our affordable housing wait list growing virtually exponentially in the last couple of years, and even those that are seen as priorities that either work or live in San Carlos, we know that the number of people that see themselves as being, housing insecure is very substantial in the city. So it's hard to kind of quantify how many people we think, might use these dollars. But as you indicated, and as we believe, it's likely to be, a lot. And we think that this funding is really just going to be initial seed funding. That being said, as well, as part of the survey that the San Mateo County Economic Development Association sent out, even for our businesses, we have an invitation from business owners saying, some of the biggest concerns we have is, our rent or our mortgage payments, but also, that compounded with our own home payments or rent. So we're hearing it from the business community, and we know that it's a concern for renters as well. So, it's hard to really quantify the number, though.
No, I appreciate that. And I mean, I'm certainly supportive of moving forward with this, because I think, there are people going to need this support. And if we have the ability to do it, we should go ahead and move forward. I guess tying into kind of, I guess maybe Latrice, if you can answer this, because I don't know how long you've been doing the Menlo Park program, how much has been distributed from there. I guess are you distributing grants that are hitting that 5,000 threshold or something? Because right now, as it's set up, I mean, you could do 20 grants and we're only helping 20 people. And so the need is going to be great. And Martin talks about this is seed funding. So I want to understand kind of where, Latrice, kind of your part, how the program's been administered, and Martin, sort of where we come back to more funding around this and what the real need might be, and how do we engage the broader community on this?
Yes, so just doing quick tally. Yeah, we are talking, if each family was at the max of 5,000, you're talking about 20 families that you would help from this fund. And yes, sad to say, I've been doing this almost 6 years, and I have seen rents in this county that can be as low as $1,200 for a room, and I've seen $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 rents. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about people in this city who suddenly have no job, but they've been able to afford a rent that's $3,000 and $4,000. Yes, I see this going rather quickly. So it's reasonable to expect that this is a start, and it's a great start. But at some point it may be exhausted, and you are looking at about most of our grants tend to be around 2,500 is what we would do. And usually we would pay up to about 2 months of rent in normal times is what we usually done. But in this instance, it's totally different. So I think it's going to require a little bit more.
And then Martin, can you just comment on sort of this is initial funding, where we might get that, or are we looking at outreach to the broader community, to maybe from the community foundation or others to kind of support this more broadly? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that's, as Latrice mentioned, it's, as we all know, it's uncharted territory, and it's difficult to, compare a rental assistance payment program in normal times versus now. And, the Menlo Park program is relatively new. We don't have data to report on how that's been used, and what they expect for maybe the second round to their council might be, and what that ask might be. So, we're not entirely sure, what the right amount of funding would be, but, we do is once the program is set up, we'll have some data to understand at least how many inquiries we're getting, to understand what a potential capacity might be. And given that it will be organized to be able to accept donations, the goal would be to partner with whatever and as many agencies as we can to advertise the program, to try and attract as many donations. As you've heard, there's several kind of places for people to help out with supporting the type of group that people want to support, whether it be a small business fund, directly impacting San Carlos, or whether, potentially it might be people want to help a fund that's directly, keeping people in their homes, and that would be where you would direct your contributions, which would be this program. So the intent is really to create a program where people can go ahead and supplement and support that particular, segment of the population or the community that they want to help support. And this would be, another avenue to direct those donations to.
All right.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks, Adam. Any other questions from anybody? And if not, I didn't see any messages from you, Crystal. Was there anyone else that popped up that wanted to speak?
No, I'm not seeing any. There are no callers on queue at this moment.
All right. Well, I think the next thing is this is definitely an action item. So we are going to need an emotion or a motion of some sort, unless there are any other questions.
I move to adopt resolution 2020-17. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos establishing a tenant assistance program, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement designating Samaritan House as program administrator and appropriating $112,000 from the housing fund to fund said program.
I second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
I would like to return to the issue of, and we obviously, are not acting on these two things together, nor would I suggest that we, defer this one so that we can act on them together. But I'd like to understand whether or not my colleagues, or how they feel about the idea of synchronizing the amount of money that we are allocating to the housing component here versus the support of small business. Because frankly, for me, I think the optics looks pretty poor if we end up putting less money in to help people than to help businesses. I want to help both, but I just feel uncomfortable about that.
Okay. Laura?
I was just going to make a separate comment, and that is that, you know, in light of the fact that it sounds like we know of 2 people that have stepped forward to ask for support, and we expect that there will likely be more people, that this be an area that we monitor over time. So it would be helpful, I think, maybe if at the next council meeting we can get an update from staff in terms of, you know, what the demand has been for this particular program, so that we could determine, you know, if we wanted to add additional funding to it at a later time.
Okay. Adam?
Thank you, Mayor Collins. I just wanted to, you know, express my support again for this program, and I guess to answer Councilmember Olbert's question, I think I mean, we're looking at different funds to pull this from, and I think there's intention that this is seed money and that we're going to be coming back to try to do this again and work with the broader community to get more funding from the private sector on this. So, I mean, I don't know that I could equate apples to apples on this, and I think this is just a start, and we're going to be coming back to this program again, I would think, fairly soon. So I don't know that we could need to balancing everything out tonight. I think, you know, we're going to see how things are moving forward from my perspective.
Okay. I certainly wouldn't want people to get the impression that we are favoring any sort of you know, residential tenant assistance over assisting businesses. You know, looks to me like business is getting some help from a lot of different angles, and it's not something that we're dismissing. It's just something that we need a little bit more time to assess it and then eventually address it. All right. Any other comments before we vote?
Mayor.
Go ahead.
If I may, would there be any interest among my colleagues about us, I'm not going to try and do the math in my head, but raising the amount of money that we'd be allocating here to $200,000 with the intention being of, obviously not a commitment, but the intention being that that would be the size, the initial seed size of item 10B as well, basically to bring them into alignment.
Well, that hasn't been brought up. Adam, you made the motion. What's your response to that?
Am I unmuted? Okay. I'm open to, I just said, like, I understand if we're pulling this from housing funds, to understand, one, whether there's adequate funding to do something like that. And I think we've gotten assurances that, you know, if we end up not using although I think we will use the funds, if we don't use them, we have other options with those funds. So I'm open to it, particularly if we think there's enough funding from our housing funds.
If I may just jump in, sorry, I wouldn't personally care if if the increase came out of the general fund, which is where the small business money is proposed to come from.
I'm wondering if maybe we do this part of it tonight. There's nothing saying we can't come back and revisit it in a month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks if we need to. So I don't know. It just seems like a good start to me. Laura, you had your hand raised a little bit ago, but then it went down again. Did you have another thought on that?
Yeah, I think where I'm landing on this is that assuming that we monitor this closely, because again, I think we don't know the full impact either on the city budget given COVID-19 and the impact on our businesses, that type of thing, that we commit to revisiting, adding additional funds to this at a later time. Because my understanding with this was tied to our affordable housing fund, which is limited in its amount. But I would be open to staff providing some additional clarification on that. I know that we're past the questioning period, but if they're willing to comment, that might be helpful to us.
So I don't want to put any thoughts in anybody's brains, but I want to make sure that we have a consensus, at least on this motion as moved at this moment. It sounds like there is certainly a consensus to come back and revisit it if need be.
The amount.
Yes, the amount of maybe increasing it at a later time. Yeah. Mark, what say you about that?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the discussion. I'll make this comment now rather than when you call for the vote, because it's hard to do that while Crystal is going through the vote in a virtual meeting. I am regretfully going to be voting against this motion as proposed. I strongly support it. I absolutely want to see us help people who may get thrown out of their homes, but I cannot in good conscience, even from a seed money point of view, potentially put less money into this particular category than I would be putting into helping businesses. I want to help them as well, but I just can't do that. So I will regretfully be voting no on the motion as raised.
Okay, so noted. Any other comments? Otherwise, Crystal, would you like to call the roll?
I had one other comment.
Oh, sure.
So just so I'm clear on stuff, is it the general consensus that there's not an interest in trying to increase the funding for this now? I guess Sarah hasn't spoken, and I just was curious before, and then I'm happy to vote on it.
I'm mulling it over.
And restart.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I just feel like we've heard from 90 business owners via the SAMCETA survey, and we have a sample set of 2 people that have reached out to Samaritan House so far. And I'm sure the need is great. And I definitely do want to revisit it. In fact, if Samaritan House burns through the money in the next 2 weeks, I want to revisit it sooner rather than later. But I think I want to test the waters here a little bit first, just to see kind of what our burn rate is with the support.
Okay. All right. Adam, so you are not inclined to change your motion at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct. I will leave it as is.
Okay. All right. Okay. Crystal? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Olbert?
No.
Vice Mayor Parma-Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
And Mayor Collins?
Yes. Okay, we're going to move on to item 10B, consideration of adopting a resolution appropriating funds from the city's unassigned general fund to the San Mateo County Strong Fund to assist San Carlos small businesses.
Good evening once again, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Martin Romo, Economic Development Manager. The second item I bring before you this evening is a resolution to appropriate between $100,000 to $400,000 to the San Mateo County Strong Fund. At its March 24th, 2020 meeting, the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors approved the creation of the San Mateo County Strong Fund and appropriated $3 million to the newly established fund. The intent of the fund is to provide emergency assistance to individuals and families, nonprofit organizations, and small businesses. The initial $3 million in seed funding has been allocated into the following 3 categories. $1 million has gone into emergency financial assistance, which provides funds for housing assistance, utilities, transportation, and other essential needs. Another $1 million has been directed to the Regional Nonprofit Emergency Fund, which helps to fund homeless shelter providers and to fund the costs of several agencies to increase the services that they provide. And thirdly, $1 million directed to the Small Business Support Grant Program, which aims to fund small businesses in the county impacted by the ongoing pandemic. At its recent meeting on April 7th, the Board of Supervisors received a presentation from county staff on updates for how the funds will be used. SAMCETA, the San Mateo County Economic Development Association, who will be working to administer the program, the Small Business Support Grant Program, provided an update for how these funds will be used. They announced that they have established a partnership with the San Mateo County Credit Union, who is building out an online portal and is aiming to open the application at some point next week. The Board of Supervisors has agendized approval of this program's eligibility guidelines for its April 21st meeting. The criteria for eligibility that the supervisors will be considering at that April 21st meeting include the following. Businesses will have to hold a valid business license that was issued before April 1st, 2019, meaning that the business should have been open for at least 1 year. Businesses will have to be between 1 to 10 full-time equivalents as of February 15th of this year, or have less than $2.5 million in annual revenue. Qualified applicants must have a primary office, storefront, or business space open to the public and located within the county, and they must be able to demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross income due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, I will recap that before the council this evening is a resolution to appropriate a fund, this SMC Strong Fund, in the amount of $100,000 to $400,000 sourced from the city's unassigned general fund, which currently has a balance of about $2 million, which would be directed to directly assist San Carlos specific small businesses. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Crystal, we would normally take some public comment right now before we have questions. Do we have anybody in the queue?
Not at this moment, but we can give a minute or two for the public to call in.
I'm going to allow a little bit of time now, so if any member of the public would like to call in, please do. The number is on your screen there. And it may be a little bit of delay. It appears it's about maybe 20-30 second delay. So if you'd like to call in and comment on this item, please do so at this time. And we'll wait about 30 seconds or so, or more if there are other callers. Crystal, any bites?
I am not seeing any calls.
Okay. Let's move on to some questions. Adam, you're up.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Collins. Martin, thank you for the presentation. Just had a couple of quick questions on this. Can you go back to the slide on the criteria, or if we're putting together this fund, do we have the ability to put any of our own criteria in, or do we have to only follow what the county ends up putting in as part of this program? We're part of a multiple point question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's my understanding that we would be subscribing to the eligibility criteria that SAMCETA through the county would be adopting. So the Board of Supervisors will ultimately be making the decision on what the criteria would be for this fund, and we would be subject to that. However, the one piece of this that we would control is that the funds must be directed to San Carlos specific businesses.
Okay, so I would, I guess I'm just going to raise, I have a little bit of concern with this then, because I don't know all the criteria that's in there, so I guess that depends on what the supervisors come up with. But, I'm going to piggyback on some of the previous discussion from the last item. Is that, I think if we could require that some of the funding had to go towards payroll, that would give me more comfort that we're only, we're helping people with rent, but we're helping the businesses. We're also helping cover payroll. So we're now helping people similar to the paycheck Protection Act has a requirement on payroll. And I just don't know that the 2.5 million is a good number for us. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of restaurants and others, I mean, while they may have low margins, some of their revenues are higher than that. We've got businesses with higher revenues. I'm not, not looking at things that are making hundreds of millions of dollars, but I would think that we should be a little bit more flexible in the criteria as well. So I'm just concerned if we're restricted to this only, that I've got some concerns with the way this is structured.
Martin, did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I can comment to say that it is still an evolving set of eligibility criteria. I think we'll have more clarity once the final set of criteria does come before the Board of Supervisors. And there may be a set of criteria that the Board of Supervisors ultimately approves that allows some flexibility for each member city that that elects to join this program. But at this point, I'm not privy to that existing, and that is a valid concern.
Okay, and can I just follow quickly on that? Is there a cap on the amount of the grant? I think they've talked about $10,000 for that per business. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think that is one of the that is also one of the criteria, the maximum amounts they're considering.
Okay, thank you.
It would be similarly, I think 2 months of operating expenses, not to exceed 10,000.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor. There was mentioned in the staff report that there was still some consideration of whether to go with grants or loans. And it sounded like, from what I heard from Roseanne Faust today on the county call, that it would be grants. Is that also your understanding, Martin?
As of today, I think it has changed so that it will be a grant program.
Okay. And then I have the same question that I asked regarding the rental assistance was, I'm sure the money will be used, but if it's not, is there a provision that it would be returned to San Carlos, or would it go into the fund itself?
Yeah, that detail hasn't been articulated yet, but I suspect it would be, and I think that we would make sure that whatever remaining funds would either be returned to the city fund or organized in such a way that would be acceptable to the council.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mark.
Let me just take a look at my question here. I was doing something else, and this may have been answered. I wanted to make sure that I understood what was happening to the money after we give it to the county. When I was reading it, it sounds like it sort of goes into a big hopper, and it may or may not come back solely to San Carlos, or what?
Yes, the intent is that whatever the amount granted, which would be 2 months of operating expenses not to exceed $10,000, would be used for San Carlos specific businesses. So they have. So,
okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Laura.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the report, Martin. Appreciate that. Again, looking at the data and the way that survey was designed, it was fairly specific in terms of the questions that were asked from my take on it. And the majority of the respondents for San Carlos did cite that they needed help with rent, leases, or payroll, as well, perhaps access to loans. So I think, going back to the previous comment I think Adam made, if there's a possibility for us to provide some criteria for how these funds would be used, I think that would be helpful. My question is around what do we know to be the mix of businesses in San Carlos? So what I'm seeing here is that they have to have between 1 to 10 full-time equivalents as of February 15th, or less than $2.5 million in annual revenue. So what I'd be curious to know is, across our community, what's the percentage of businesses that fall outside of that versus those that fall within that?
That's an excellent question. I don't have the answer to you immediately, but I could certainly figure that out. We do have a substantial amount of small businesses that would meet this definition of less than 10 full-time equivalencies. We've got a lot of sole proprietorships that would qualify for this, but in terms of the percentage of the businesses in town that would qualify for this, either with the 10 FTE or the $2.5 million, I don't have an immediate answer for you.
Yeah. So my take on it was that of those people that responded, those first 90 respondents to the survey, it appeared to me they didn't cite their revenues, but most of them had, identified themselves as, gig workers or having, they were consultancy practice, sole proprietor, small shops where they've had to lay people off, like around the 5 to 10 number. Most of them were kind of, in between 1 and 5 for sure. Is that your sense, Martin, in terms of our community that we're trying to target with these funds?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, that's correct.
So there again, I mean, my sense is as if, again, we're not talking about a lot of money, right? This isn't going to go that far. This would effectively, at a $10,000 grant level, serve potentially 10 businesses, maybe 20. It'd be similar to that rental assistance program, is my take on this.
All right. Martin, I think my question is that I apologize. Laura, did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
No, it was a mix of questions and comments, I guess. So
Okay.
I'm good for now.
All right, thanks. So Martin, my question is we have a rather large range here that we are thinking about appropriating between $100,000 and $400,000. And I'm wondering how should we think of this, and how should we compare, say, to what other cities have done, and maybe what we would do? Is there a metric we can use to figure out what an appropriate number is, or is there some other criteria we should use?
Yeah, I might yield to the city manager's office on this range that was recommended.
Yeah, I was thinking of asking Jeff about that, but I thought I'd start with you.
Well, seeing as how I'm the one that put the range together, you're talking to the right person. The council hadn't talked about this at all, and I didn't want you to be constrained by how we agendized this. If you wanted to do a larger contribution, that's why I put the $400,000 limit on, so that you'd have a higher range to be able to consider. The 100,000 was closer to what I was thinking, and it was really based on, we put this on after Redwood City took action and gave a donation of 300,000. And so one metric, the metric that I've been looking at, would be per capita, and Redwood City's population is about 86,000. So I think if you were to do the math, it would work out to be like, I don't know, $110,000 contribution from our city to the fund in terms of matching per capita. That's just, one metric that, we just quick and dirty that we could look at and use, like the housing program that the council just adopted. This will be something that we're going to be continually monitoring as the funds are deployed, and would want to get back to the council as we started to approach depletion, to give you the opportunity to let you know what the metrics were, how many businesses were assisted in the program, what the current balance was, if there's, a waiting list that's been generated already for our community, that sort of thing. The other thing that we weren't sure about, we kind of approached this as a business opportunity for a business program, but as you see with the county dollars, they broke it up, and so you could do the same thing and allocate some percentage of the funding for things other than small businesses too, if that was your priority. But we just wanted to give you a range, and so that range is what we picked.
Do we have any data from any other cities, or is Redwood City the first out of the gate?
They were the only one that I was aware of last week when we were putting this report together, but we could do some more research.
I thought Foster City had made a contribution too, and I thought it was closer to like 500,000 for Foster City. was my recollection.
Yeah, I think that was in the paper.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think other cities are considering it as well. Roseanne mentioned on the call today.
And Foster City is about our size and population, so there goes our metrics. We have a big city giving more and a small city, or a big city
And-
giving less and a small city giving more.
And that's why I raised that ceiling up, because,
Yeah.
I anticipated that the council, your priorities may be that you want to put more into this fund initially, and, just didn't want to artificially constrain you before we even had an opportunity to discuss it.
Well, let me, just before we get into discussion, Crystal, I haven't seen any notes from you. Did anyone else, did we hear from anyone else who wanted to speak?
I have
Or
not
did
seen.
we hear from anybody at all that wanted to speak on this item?
Right. I haven't seen any calls come in for this.
Okay. All right. So let's, I would like to have some recommendations from my fellow council members. What's your thinking? We have a pretty big range and we don't really have any hard and fast guidelines that we can follow from other cities. So I'd be interested to know what your thinking is here. Otherwise, I'm going to throw out a number.
Yeah, I think I'd like to consider the lower end of the range in similar fashion to the rental assistance program, is that we monitor this very closely to see what the demand is. And that will buy us a little bit of time too, for once the county supervisors vote on criteria and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Adam, what are your thoughts?
I could be fine with that. I think that the other thing I'd like to see and understand, though, is what our ability is to maybe look more broadly at some of the businesses, and as we continue to get data in, understand it, because I am concerned about some of the criteria that's set up. I understand it's hitting a certain portion, but there are other businesses in town that will look and need some help, and so I'd be fine with the lower end, but also want to look at maybe what other programs we might be able to plug into if we were going to look at putting additional funds in based on as the needs are changing within the community, and to hear from some of the sort of, I would say mid-size, but not some of the businesses that maybe some of the restaurants that are employing 40, 50 people and have higher revenues, but obviously are going to be impacted by this downturn.
Yeah. Sarah? Not to pick on you, but
Okay. I think I agree with the lower end as well. I'd be comfortable with the 100 to 200,000 range and just kind of see what businesses apply and what the feedback is from our business community. And, Adam's point, then we could, look at the criteria and see who's being left out and not qualifying. I also have one other comment that I wanted to throw out there concerning this program, and that is that I think that we will need a concerted communications effort to let businesses know that this program is out there. We've been talking a lot about what other cities are doing, and I wanted to just note that Redwood City established a call center, and they called every business in Redwood City to let them know kind of business resources and support that is out there. Redwood City staff developed a letter and was sent on behalf of the mayor that talked about business support resources, and that was sent out to all the businesses in Redwood City. Burlingame is considering having their staff, their development officer, focus almost 100% of his time assisting small businesses tap into support programs out there. So I know that we have talked about getting the chamber involved, but I think that our economic development staff has done such a great job putting resources up on our website and collecting all of the different resources that are out there. And then assuming that this grant program takes off, I would like to consider how we are communicating with our business, all of our businesses in town. And I really think that that's more of a staff job, a city job, than a chamber job, just given the level of expertise that our staff already has on this subject. So throwing that out there too.
Mark, I think, thank you, Sarah. Mark,
Ron,
I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about this.
Ron, can I just touch on this for 1
Sure.
second? I just want to because we have a small business in town, and I received an email today from the city with all the resources that are available. So I know there's some community. So Sarah, I just want to pass that on, that there is something going on in that stuff. I don't know where it's, but from economic development, I've got an email with significant amount of data and information and where to get questions answered on loans and grants.
Okay. All right. Mark? What do you think?
I tell you what, I have a specific number in mind. I think we ought to fund this at $112,000 to start. Okay, for obvious reasons I won't bother to explain, because I think you all realize where I'm coming from on that.
Mm-hmm.
I would also point out that apropos of the outreach efforts, maybe I missed it. I don't recall us having any discussions in that level of detail about reaching out to the people on the affordable housing program who might also need assistance. And that might frankly explain why we haven't heard from more of them, is that they don't, I know some people in that category, and unlike retired bums like me, they don't have a lot of time to sit around reading things and researching them. They're trying to live hand to mouth. Okay. So I would say that $112,000 to fund this to start, and whatever effort we do here in terms of outreach, I suggest we do a parallel effort with the other program.
Okay. Adam, your hand came up briefly and disappeared. Did you have another thought?
I think I just forgot to put it down.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, unless there's any more deep thoughts, I'd entertain, I think it's time to look at a motion and put a number in there.
Yeah. I move to adopt resolution
2020-18.
A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos appropriating $112,000 from the city's unassigned general fund balance to the San Mateo County Strong Fund to assist San Carlos small businesses.
Second.
All right, there's a second. Any other discussion on this? All right, Crystal, please.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Parmer Lohan?
Yes.
And Mayor Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor, may I make just a brief one?
Yes.
Thank you very much for keeping these two programs in alignment. Although I will have to admit that I'm now disappointed that I'm not going to be able to publish the really interesting and I had fun writing blog post that I was going to put out if we had funded them substantially differently. But it's going to have to go in the trash bin. So thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
What will you do? Okay. We are going to move on to new business item 10C, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the city manager continuing resolution authority consistent with the adopted and amended fiscal year 2019 to 2020 annual operating and capital budget until the adoption of the fiscal year 2021 budget for a period of no longer than 90 days, starting on July 1st, 2020. Is this you, Jeff? Or
it's
no?
No, it's me.
Oh, Rebecca.
Yes. Good evening, Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. Before you tonight is the continuing budget resolution. See if I can. So approval of this resolution will set the appropriation levels for the next fiscal year at the same level that they're at today. The continuing resolution will be in effect beginning July 1st, 2020, and will continue for a period of 90 days until such time that we can adopt the budget. It's a little slow. Every agency must adopt an official appropriation level, which is typically done at the time that we adopt the budget in June. Since the budget study sessions originally scheduled for May 7th and May 12th were canceled as a result of the COVID-19 emergency situation, the resolution before you tonight will allow the city to continue services and pay bills and payroll at the same levels that we have now. Any changes to service levels or new projects would still come forward to council as they normally would have done. So attachment 2 and 3 in your packet show the existing fiscal year 2019-20 appropriations, as well as the additional operating changes that council has approved this fiscal year. These changes will be incorporated into the continuing resolution set at $125 million. The plan is to bring a modified budget forward for council consideration in late August or early September. This pie chart reflects the total citywide expenditures of the $125 million allocated to each of the following categories. The general fund at $48.65 million, the wastewater sewer fund at $16.9 million, debt and other revenue funds at $1.14 million, capital funds at $56.3 million, which includes any projects that were previously approved but not completed, and internal service funds of $2.2 million. These revenue estimates shown here will also be held at the existing budget levels. When we bring the budget forward later this summer, we'll revise the budget numbers as appropriate. These are the general fund revenues that are most likely to be impacted from the coronavirus emergency. Property tax is one of our largest revenue sources, and although the county has delayed the second payment that was originally due on April 10th to May 4th, there will be no delay in the transfer of funds this fiscal year. Future revenues could be impacted, however, by the slowing of construction and development and possible impacts to real estate sales. Sales tax is our second largest revenue source, and we are expecting to have significant reductions this year. Earlier this month, the governor announced 2 deferral programs for small businesses. On March 30th, the governor approved a 90-day extension plan for all businesses filing a return for less than $1 million in tax liability. The second program was approved a few days later on April 2nd and allows small businesses to enter into a 12-month interest-free installment plan agreement for up to $50,000 of sales and use tax liability. A business who takes advantage of this program will owe their first payment on August 31st if they combine it with the first program. So these 2 deferral plans, along with expected declines in revenue, will have a significant impact on our revenues this year and next, and possibly into the future. Transient occupancy taxes are collected by each hotel and remitted to the city on a quarterly basis. As a result of the shelter-in-place order, an overall decline in business travel, it is anticipated this revenue will also drop significantly. Charges for services and licenses and permits represent 14% of our revenue. This revenue not only includes development and construction fees and permits, but also includes park and recreation fees. Since our facilities were closed in early March and our programs were canceled, we're anticipating declines in recreation revenue until such time that those programs can resume. In addition, although we have the ability to take certain development permits online, with the county order and construction activity limited, we expect declines in those areas as well. Business registration is a smaller portion of our overall revenues, but we believe that these revenues could be at risk if businesses are not able to reopen in future months. Use of money and property not only includes investment income, which was clearly impacted, but it also includes lease incomes from city-owned properties and digital billboard revenues. We're continuing to monitor all of these categories, and we'll be bringing more accurate updates to council as more details emerge. The initial estimates of revenue losses are between 3 to 5 million, but these numbers could change. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Rebecca. Wonderful presentation as always. this is actually less of a question than it is sort of a statement or observation, probably more for Jeff. When this whole thing broke, I was reminded of, I forget which one it was. It was a company I had worked at in the finance area in the private sector who went through some significant economic negative impact like this. And what I remember is my group started churning out forecasts and updates, like it seemed like almost weekly. We were doing them monthly. We had an in-depth process for doing latest estimates every month for what we thought the current fiscal year was going to look like, but we started doing it every week. I would really like to encourage staff, Jeff, to think about, even if we have to hire some master in public policy graduate student from Stanford to go through and analyze our stuff and give us sort of constantly updated best guesses on what the impact on our revenues is. It's a pretty serious number, and getting a handle as soon as we can on what's likely to be the case is very significant, because a loss of a few $1 million in revenue that we think is going to turn around relatively quickly is one thing. A loss of a few $1 million annually that we expect to continue for a number of years is something totally different. And yet that's exactly the thing that we need to understand. So I very much appreciate the report. I appreciate the sort of first pass estimate of what's at risk and what we might be exposed to. But I personally would be willing to spend a little money here to get Rebecca some resources so that we can have some more robust forecasting going on.
I just
sorry,
respond
Adam.
to that real quick. We work with a company called HDL, which is I think the largest provider in the state of California of tax revenue data. So that'll give us a picture not only of our own local revenues, but also a statewide picture, which will help, and a region-wide picture, which will help inform us as well. So, our struggle as a government entity is, like I could tell you, tomorrow with just a little bit of research, what's happening with our building revenue or our Parks and Rec revenue, because we control that directly. But the sales tax revenue and TOT and things, they don't flow through us directly. They flow through other government agencies before they come to us. So we don't have that boots on the ground data. HDL has a pipeline to get that data, as quick as that data is actually available to us. So this is going to be something that we're going to be very focused on for a while. And it's something that your administrative services director and myself, I guess it's not sad at this moment, but sort of sadly have quite a bit of experience with in our careers, in our career specifically in San Carlos. So we're starting to tread on ground we're pretty familiar with, we haven't seen in a while, but we have a pretty solid playbook, and we'll be bringing quite a bit of data and options to the council as we move forward relative to our budget and our finance picture. So I appreciate the council taking it so seriously at this point. We really appreciate that. It'll pay dividends down the road.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just as a brief follow-up. I'm glad to hear that, Jeff. I'm not surprised, but I am glad to hear that. I guess I would emphasize once again that the issue here in my mind is less about getting data than it is about getting forecasts. And that's, the forecasting is hard because of all the things you mentioned, but it's even harder because you're having to project the future. But that's fundamentally, at least for myself, with my finance background, that's what I want to see. Even if you come back, 1 week you tell me one thing and the next week it's 30% different, I can deal with that. What I can't deal with is waiting 6 weeks to get more accurate data. So that's just what I wanted to make clear.
All right, Adam, I'm going to take your comment, but before we do that, Crystal's going to put up the public comment screen. So while we're listening to your question, the public comment screen will be up, and encourage anybody who does want to speak on this to please call in. In the meantime, Adam, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Collins. I had just two really quick questions, and Jeff, you and I talked about one of these before, but with the Fairfield Inn being occupied and fully by the state, federal government piece, is there any way to recapture some of that TOT that is, the owner of that hotel is getting paid, and is there a way to capture that? And then secondly, Rebecca, if you can just touch a little more on why you think the property tax funding is at risk outside of maybe the just a delay, which sounds like that's not an issue. Thanks.
So for the Fairfield Inn,
well, either one, if you both can answer. I talked to Jeff, but just the two questions. So either way, whoever wants to answer them is great.
I'll take the Fairfield.
Okay.
We've made a request to the Fairfield Inn owner for a copy of the contract that they signed with the federal government, and I guess there's probably a modified version that we've requested for now the state, who's going to be involved with that facility now. They didn't think that they would be required. The owner didn't think they'd be required to remit TOT payment to the city. We have a different point of view. We're certainly going to make that case and make that claim. It's also potentially something that we may claim in terms of disaster assistance. This obviously, operating a hotel of this nature in this way is, relatively unique, even statewide. There's only a handful. And, we believe that our community's been asked to do something special and really rose to the occasion. And as a result, should receive their fair compensation as a community from that endeavor. So we're going to make that case.
Thank you. And then just on the property tax funding, Rebecca, just any more light on why you think that's at risk?
For this year, I don't think it's at risk, but in the future, we may not get the CPI increases that we would normally get. In addition, the timing of the delays of the development projects will delay the timing of when those properties would hit our assessed rolls, which is something we were trying to forecast out longer term.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just add real quick that what we saw in the great housing recession was a flattening of our property tax. Properties didn't sell as quickly, and values didn't increase as quickly, so they really flattened out, and we lost that sort of CPI adjustment that we're used to and that we typically anticipate. And so we're thinking for property tax along those lines in terms of forecasting, to Councilmember Olbert's point, that's actually a good data point for this particular situation as well. Some of the others, maybe not so much, but this one's we think will probably track fairly closely to the 08-09 property tax behavior.
Okay. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow on what Jeff and Adam and Rebecca were talking about there, I think that's an important nuance for all of us to keep in mind. I mean, when we say that a revenue stream is at risk, part of it also is we have to understand what the nature of the risk is. In the case of property taxes, I mean, given that I suspect the median assessed value of a house in San Carlos is probably still only about $700 and some odd thousand, house prices would have to fall a lot before they stop going up. Now, they definitely will flatten out because of sales declining, because there won't be upticks in the assessed value pool. And there will be a growing number of people perhaps who look to get rollbacks on the assessed value, which is also allowed under law. But it's important to realize when we say something's at risk, the risks are not all the same. The nature of the risks are not all the same in each of those revenue streams.
Okay. All right. I don't see anybody else wanting to speak. So, and apparently we do not have any public comment queued up. So I think we are at, we're at a motion unless there's any more questions.
I move to adopt resolution 2020-19,
19.
a resolution of the City Council the City of San Carlos authorizing the city manager continuing resolution authority consistent with the adopted and amended fiscal year FY 2019-2020 annual operating and capital budget until the adoption of the FY 2020-2021 budget for a period of no longer than 90 days starting on July 1st, 2020.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any other final words? Crystal, please call the roll.
I'm sorry, I must have missed. Who seconded that?
There were
I
two of
seconded
us.
it, or maybe Mark did.
Pick whichever one you like.
Thank you. Councilmember McDowell?
Yes.
Councilmember Olbert?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Councilmember Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor Collins?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, motion passes. Now I believe we're going to go back to item 7, agenda setting, and 7A, consideration of agendizing following COVID-19 related topics for discussion at an upcoming council meeting. Number 1 is establish a program of volunteer caseworkers to act as advisors to community members seeking assistance programs available to them. Mark, was this your item?
Actually, I believe all of the things are my items, and hopefully everybody got the more extended written versions of the stuff. And what I was going to suggest, Mr. Mayor, if it was okay, is if people have specific questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, it really depends upon whether anybody else wants to support any of these things. Obviously, I do, or I wouldn't have put them up there. So in the time, maybe we can go through if anybody has questions and if anybody wants to discuss pursuing any of them.
Well, I think we did get. I did see your comments, and they were included in the packet. Did anyone else have any questions or want to address any of these specifically or see them on a future agenda? And hang on a second. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I mean, it looks like we sort of addressed a couple of them tonight, so, or at least one. Well, Mark, did you want to say anything else?
I will say that I obviously think all of these are worth our consideration, or I wouldn't have submitted them. I am particularly concerned about the last item, which basically is, I know for a fact, as I think you guys do too, that I am still in touch with developers who are moving forward with projects. And I don't dispute the fact that they should be doing that, and they can do it from working at home and whatnot. But we are going to likely lose more and more of whatever review time that we might have anticipated having for adjusting our land use regulations because of the COVID-19 crisis. And if we don't do something about that, what we're going to find is I think less and less flexibility to do something should we decide to do it. So that of all of them, that's probably the one that I would give somewhat more focus to. But if nobody wants to support that stuff, nobody wants to support that stuff. That's why there are 5 of us. So
okay. Adam, did you want to?
Just a quick comment on one of them. I think on the review of the fiscal impacts. I mean, just Mark, or do you feel like that's sort of been covered by, like, we're going to be looking at that, or Jeff? I'm assuming that at some point you would intend to do that regardless. I mean, I'm happy to support that because I think we should review the fiscal impacts at some point. I don't know if that has to happen now, but because I don't know that we have enough data yet. So that would be the one that I'd be, I would for sure want to support. But if you tell me it's going to happen anyway, then I'm okay with however that proceeds.
If as I guess a very short version of what I tried to explain a few minutes ago is, from my point of view, Adam, I actually don't want to wait for the data. I'd like to see a forecast sooner than that. There's 2 dimensions to the forecast: what we think is going to happen to revenues and how long we think it's going to last. And I will not hold anybody accountable for the specifics of that, because that's the nature of forecasts. But that's why after Jeff and I talked about this, even with the budget item on the agenda here tonight, that's why I asked to have it left in there, because I do feel that looking at a revenue forecast sooner rather than later is important, even sooner than the end of this fiscal year.
All right, Sarah?
Thank you. I wanted to comment on Mark's last point. It's my understanding, and I had an opportunity to talk to Jeff about it today, that the commercial projects in general have slowed a bit. And I do agree with you. I want to make sure that we keep our foot on the gas pedal with our East Side Planning Initiative. It is important, and it's something that we listed as a strategic priority, to take a proactive approach to planning and development on the East Side especially. So I don't know if Jeff wants to chime in on that, but it's my impression that that's still going to be going forward.
Yes, that's correct, Councilmember McDowell. We still understand that to be a priority of the City Council, still part of your strategic plan, and we still are going to make every effort. I think obviously right now there are delays in everything, including processing applications and doing advanced planning work. We may need to rejigger what our staff is working on and how they're doing, depending on sort of the long range impacts of financial impacts of this and the effects that it has on development. If they're similar to what we've seen in the past, we could expect a pretty significant slowing, even for projects that have been inside the planning process already. We saw that with the Palo Alto Medical Foundation Hospital, and it's continued to this day. It still hasn't gone forward and been built. So that's, those are all important considerations that we're going to look at, and we're going to make sure that we get to those priorities of the City Council as soon as possible. I know we're still working on those now, and I expect at least while we're operating under the emergency order and the shelter-in-place order, that we will definitely be delayed in processing of applications, and in fact, we're not even accepting any new applications currently for development projects in San Carlos.
Okay.
If I may.
Sure.
I just would like to remind folks that remember that the rules that bind a project that we are required by law to follow when we decide whether or not a project is in the interest of the community are the rules that exist at the day the application is filed in a complete form. Now, to the extent, as Jeff was saying now, no applications are being accepted because of the emergency, that's not an issue. But once it gets back to we're open for business and accepting applications, whatever the rules are the day that that application in finished form crosses the threshold, that's what we're stuck with. I understand the logic and the bet, if you will, of what we're talking about doing, of not trying to do something more aggressive like what I was describing in my proposal. But it is a significant bet. Again, if a lot of it is going to depend upon exactly what the economic consequences of this emergency are. If it's something analogous to the Great Depression or the Great Recession, I agree completely with what Jeff said. If it's a relatively quick turn back, then I don't agree with them at all. And I don't know which one that's going to be either, but that's the bet we're making. So, but we've probably discussed this enough, because I don't, it takes 3 people to do this, and I don't think there's even more than 1 at this point. So,
Mayor Cons, could I just ask, because I don't know that Jeff answered my question about the review of the impact of revenues. I think Mark sort of filled back in, but I don't think Jeff. I mean, do you anticipate, like, sort of before the budget or sometime in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we would get some sort of review of impact of revenues?
Well, I guess I could ask that question over to Rebecca in terms of, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, what would be a reasonable amount of time frame, Rebecca, for you to be able to start to put, something together that we can, at least as Mark says, just kind of report out to council on, this is what we're thinking based on these factors for now, and stay tuned. Obviously, everything we're going to be working on this starting right now just to be ready for the budget for you all. So to the extent that we have preliminary data in the meantime, I would be happy to share it. I don't see any reason not to share it with the council and the community, with the caveat that, you know, it would be real rough.
Yes, and we actually are working on that right now. That's how we came up with the 3 to 5 million estimate. You know, we're trying to dial those numbers in a little bit more, but this is something that the staff is working on right now. They've been working on it the last couple of days, and we're working with HDL to get more data. You know, I'm curious to see what happens tomorrow, what the governor's announcement will be, because that may impact some of our sales tax revenue as well. So over the next 2 to 4 weeks, we should have more detail for you to share with the council.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, that just means I'd be supportive of putting that piece on the agenda at some point, but it sounds like we're going to get it anyway. So either way.
Yeah.
From my end. Thanks.
Okay. So sounds like for the moment, we're taking a pass. So we are on to 11A, reflections and agenda setting. Anybody have anything else that they wanted to relate? Laura?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to thank Jeff and staff for doing a tremendous job. I know the situation is extremely fluid and it's very dynamic and changing all the time. I expect that tomorrow the governor, you know, whatever his news will be, will put us on yet another and different trajectory. I also know that many, you know, factions of the community are starting to think about what life looks like as we come out of shelter in place. So, you know, I'm committed to staying in tune with those conversations as well as to our community to understand people's needs. And, you know, my ask is of everyone just to, you know, step forward and share with us what is on your mind, what you're concerned about, and what you need in order to get back to life as you knew it. Hopefully, we will, you know, at some point in the near future, return to life like it was, but maybe with a little bit more social distancing and that type of thing. But I just want to, you know, hats off to staff. I know you guys have been working and gals have been working very hard, and I'm very, very appreciative for everything that you've done.
Well said, Laura. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to echo a little bit of what Laura was saying. I too am continue to be impressed with staff's diligence and efforts in all these areas. I particularly appreciate personally how rapidly staff members like Chief Dury and Jeff and Greg have gotten back to me with questions that I've seen on social media, because to the extent it's possible, I'm trying to sort of tamp down things a little bit where they're starting to spiral out of control. And obviously I can't do that without knowing what the real story is, and I can't do that without staff. So hats off to you guys for doing all that stuff. And I also just wanted to say briefly, assuming he's still actually there listening, I see his name there, that Martin, you look really good in that beard, and I'm jealous, but you know, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sometimes I feel like we're all in this rowboat rowing in the middle of the night, and we don't know where we're going. But yeah, I also echo everybody else's comments about the hard work the staff is doing. It's what a Herculean feat this is, and again, uncharted waters. So we all very much appreciate what you're doing. And with that, any other staff comments or on city administrative business?
Nothing on city administrative business, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all my staff members for their hard work and their expertise and their willingness to be flexible in how they're approaching their job and serving the community. I know how much the community and our programs mean to our staff members. And I've just been very proud to lead this organization during this time. I'd also like to thank the council for your support and your patience and your advice throughout this. This is uncharted territory. I've been doing this for 25 years, and while I might have fantasized about this, I never actually imagined I would be wearing sweatpants and a dress shirt at a city council meeting in my living room. But here we are. and everybody's smiling and doing their very best. And I appreciate that. You're making decisions that I imagine you didn't imagine you'd be making when you ran for office. And you're doing a wonderful job, and you're approaching it in a very San Carlos community-oriented way. And then lastly, I'd like to thank the community for all their support and their kindness, not only towards city workers and our city services and our sister agencies, but also one another. And the spirit in which they've embraced these health orders has really made a difference. It's saved lives. And while I have no doubt that there's going to be some challenges in our future here in 2020, if we can take that same kind of energy and that same kind of community character and apply it to those challenges as they arise, I have no doubt that San Carlos is going to emerge from this, as it's emerged from other difficult periods in its past, better than it was before, stronger than it was before, and more ready and willing to take on the future. So that's all I've got to add. Thank you all very much tonight for your meeting and your energy and participation.
Good. Well, I think we got this meeting a little bit better than the last one, although the last one wasn't too bad. All right. Well, with that, we are adjourned. Good night to all.